282. Into the Void. Year 272. We didn't see the need to rush into Lumuf's choice. After all, we could figure out what's happening on the peripheral lands, before choosing the better fit. That was the thought with Edna's choice, too. So what did you get? Lumuf's turn to rib the knight. The knight didn't seem too enthusiastic. I could summarize them into three main directions. The first choice of my level 200 domain is the martial Paragon. In this form, I would achieve what we long for. Combat ability not only on par, and even more than the heroes. Martial Paragon would allow my duty to last longer, and my overall combat abilities would rise significantly. Some of my abilities would also gain upgrades, such as my quest swords would gain even more power. I gain the ability to teleport to any of the fellow domain holders who are members of the Pantheon, at my choice. I am also able to leave a Shadow Knight with members of the Pantheon to provide some protection. I found it underwhelming. She sighed. I think, aside from power, the utility aspects of this choice is lackluster. Lumuf frowned. Edna, I think you should worry about the utility issue. The rest of us will deal with it. Edna nodded. That is true. Then what's the next? The Divine Herald of Knights. I gain the ability to sense the presence of all knight classes all over the world, and more. The Herald of Knights gains the ability to speak and grant quests to all knight classes all over the world directly, grant blessings, rewards, and also bestow knight classes of different tiers. I am also able to form knight orders out of a group of knights, which grants them some kind of group-wide ability. I am also able to teleport to any knight that requests for my aid, or send magical assistance and spiritual knights. Pantheon members also gain an ability to set up a lesser knight order. This is more in line with a goddess of knights stela chewed on a suite of some kind. With the defense of Satria completed, the next phase was the Void Worlds, the Peripheral Worlds, and also the Assimilation of Delvagard. In short, the first choice is to go tall in the direction of combat. This second choice goes wider, just like how Lumuf's one did. I must say I am starting to see a pattern. Stella wondered. It's just how the system creates these domains. It's a choice of focus, or breadth. Rune said as if he knew it all along. Johann poked his fellow domain holder. And you know what's yours going to be? I bet mine's going to be some kind of super archer upgrade, or some kind of split archer form. Alright, Edna, what's the third choice? The third choice is the wildcard choice. Sword of the Void Forest. It is the domain that takes me closer to Eon, Lumuf, and Stella. Edna looked at Lumuf in a way that made Lumuf squirm uncomfortably. What in the world? I can also be an avatar of Eon. Edna repeated. And you can be an avatar of me. Lumuf's eyes widened in shock. Stella shook her head. That's a clear no. That's too much. You didn't even hear the details. Edna said. Stella, the system clearly considers you as part of this arrangement. The primary power of this domain choice is the ability to have spiritual equivalents, or as the system calls it, manifestations, and tag along with Eon's node trees, clones, Stella's Void Explorer, and Lumuf's avatar form. In this form, I essentially become a person with multiple bodies, like Eon's clone. These manifestations are void in nature, and I can travel in the Void Sea with your Void Explorers. You create them? Lumuf asked. No. Strangely enough, this domain binds the manifestation to the abilities of Stella and Eon. My manifestations appear whenever there is a clone or a Void Explorer, or your avatar. Form. It's a package. A form of subdomain, but not totally subservient. Lumuf thought about it. In a way, it's more of a Pantheon support type of role. Edna countered. Though the choice mentioned Lumuf, Eon and Stella specifically, it's not actually limited to them. It extends to all Pantheon members. The rest of the domain holders were in thought, but then Johann laughed. Rune, you might get a mixed choice. Think about it. What if you got an Eon's archer type of ability? Rune rolled his eyes. At least you won't get one link to your prospective partner. Izar, the brawler, chuckled. Imagine that. Rune had a look of genuine horror. Oh no way. It is a wildcard choice. Stella decided it was a fun topic and added fuel to the flame. A wildcard romance-linked domain choice would be a supreme troll move from the system. I am going to opt for the World Faith system if the system does that to me. Rune countered. You're taunting the system. Stella feigned horror. Rune realized Stella had a point and decided it was best to just shut up. We didn't decide that day. We had worlds to visit, and we wanted Alka to join us in the choice. We would prefer to optimize our abilities. Choices that would get us through the next hurdle. It also helped that Alka would have a level up of his own, and we wanted to hear from him. What was it like, being dead? Lumuf, Stella and Edna gathered for a trip. The three were often the first to visit dangerous places, and this time, they would visit the Void Worlds together. The Void Worlds exist only in the Void layers, and it would be the first time my people ventured there. We wondered what it was like, but after all the wondering, it was time to visit. Well, Stella summoned the Void Mana in her body, and tapped into the Void layers. The Void layers required a few additional extra steps of locational information, and the cost of opening a rift to the Void layers was a little bit higher than normal, but other than the extra ring of magical glow around the rift itself, it seemed pretty normal. To the first Void World. Lumuf laughed, and walked through without hesitation. Stella stared. Hey wait, she called out, but Lumuf was already through. I thought it wasn't ready. Edna smiled at the Void Mage, and then, she walked through too. Damn it. Stella ran through. The path through the Void layers was as if one slipped through the gaps of reality. They existed on a different layer of the Void Sea, occupying the same place, but on a different plane. Well, took you long enough. Lumuf smiled as Stella finally stepped through. We looked around, and saw a world with a burning black sun, and a surface made of darkened rock. So where are we? Stella said, but just as she said that, her own magic expanded into the world. Void World. Our magical senses rang, as a strange creature appeared before us. It emerged from the same type of rift gates that we used, but the shape was different. It was some kind of worm, and it immediately judged us. It stared at us. It has 15 eyes, and tentacles that looked like they were made of the Void Sea itself. It radiated void mana through its body. The eyes, each of them were as if they were made of starry skies, dark, and yet, somehow deep. The three spoke telepathically. This is a void creature. Stella said. It was a familiar feeling. She sensed creatures like this in the Void Sea, but to encounter them in the Void layers was somewhat expected. Standing before us was a creature that didn't look like any living being, and through Lumuf, I sensed it wasn't even a creature with a normal soul. It was as if it was cobbled together from something that belonged in the Void Sea. It reminded me of a jellyfish, its mind distributed throughout its limbs. It stared at us for a while, and just as suddenly, the rift gates emerged again. It then vanished. Well, what was that? Edna said. I don't know. It looked like it was curious, but not altogether hostile. Stella countered. The Void World itself had a dark sun. The world had a glow that was quite similar to the reflected lights of the moon. Faint. There were clouds in this world, made of black dust of some sort, and when they covered the sun, the world around us twisted. The laws of reality worked differently here. A world wasn't a fixed object, but a flexible one that transformed according to the sun's light. The terrain warped, and somehow the way it warped was always relative to our position. It only warped when the three of them were not there, in the distance, visible. The stars lead to different places. Stella stared, as she watched the position of the world shifted. It was as if the void layers were rolling a wheel, and the stars spun, slowly, and slowly settling into position. Edna nodded. Useful. Potentially. Stella countered, as we continued to explore the void world. It was a world that was bare. There was no vegetation of any sort. The terrain was all rock and sand, all blackened rock and sand, all imbued with void mana to some degree. We searched. And searched. Then we came across a large rocky plain that finally had something unusual. A crater with a skeleton at the center. It was a human of some kind, but a little taller than the normal human. The body had long been eroded by the sandy winds. What was left was just the bones, perfectly preserved, made of something resistant to the wind's corrosion. A body. I could probably use the bones to search its memories, just like with the dragons. How did it get here? It's been here for a long time. Lumuf said, judging from the layers of sand and the condition of the crater. The edges of what would have been the impact crater were all smoothed out. Eroded by the winds. The wind carried the same black dust everywhere. The wind was created by magic, the swirling energies of the void. This world should not have winds, but it did, because the rifts created low and high pressure areas throughout the world. Each time a rift opened by the strange rift monsters that sometimes visited, it created a pressure zone. Winds. There was nothing else, but the void layers contained many worlds. Many more that Stella could see. We would have more to visit. Satria. Lumuf and Rune returned to Satria, to find the two priests waiting for them. Hawa wishes to speak to you, Lord Lumuf. Michael said with a bow. They've been exceptionally polite, and since the defeat of the Demon King, they have treated Lumuf with the full benefits of a foreign dignitary, and some. It was a treatment that the lesser-ranked priests found strange, but those in the Divine Guard silenced them, claiming that it was Hawa's command. The Hawa's circle rarely devoted full attention to any one person, but Lumuf, as avatar of a peer, was leagues above. It made Lumuf feel a little strange, of course. The entire courtyard waited, as Michael and Olivia sat at the side. Lumuf sat, while Rune stood behind him. The world twisted, and Hawa arrived once more. Here, in Museo, most mortal men never felt the presence of God so close. It would be something they remember for the rest of their lives. To be in the same city as Hawa arrived would be a mark on their souls. Well done, and most impressive. Hawa spoke, his golden form shone. You've saved me precious points. Each of us spends every point we can spare, especially in defense of the faraway realms. I waited for him to speak, as Lumuf glowed. The avatar form rippled in the air, and the entire temple structure wobbled as my own energies rubbed against the energies of Hawa. A golden pendant emerged from nowhere, as if it popped out of space itself. This contains my will, and you may use this to sway my faithful followers in the peripheral worlds. Those who possess my related classes would know that you represent me, and you can claim to act on my behalf. Useful. Change the balance of power, Eon. I do admit feeling like I am being used. I responded. Both priests paled at my statement, and feared Hawa's retribution. They didn't know how their god would react to such a rebuke. You can claim the peripheral worlds as your own. I have no need for them, and many of us lose points holding on to them. I'll do it, of course. But I'd like your knowledge. Of the demons, of the other gods. Of how the system works. Of the worlds you have access to. I countered. I didn't mind working, and expanding my influence in new worlds was a win, even if it was contested territory, but I wanted knowledge. There was a moment of silence, as the air around us wobbled. Eventually, Hawa agreed. I will share what I know. Another golden gem appeared, a quick glance of it is clearly a divine item. This will allow you to ask me questions. I will reply to them when I am able. I will inform you of what I can tell you. Some things are restricted by our pact. I will let you know if it is. Both Michael and Olivia's eyes were filled with greed. 2 new divine items appearing in a single day would cause the priests to go insane. Armies would fight to get hold of them. But no one would dare snatch it from Lumuf's hand. Very well. This is more like it. I answered. I will begin to reach out to the peripheral worlds, and will need to travel through some of your outer worlds. Understood. But move quietly. Some of my worlds know no other god but me, and it is in my interest to keep it that way. You may take my 2 priests with you to the peripheral worlds. I hear my priestess has found one of your minions attractive, and would like to be married. It made Rune and Olivia blush. I merely brushed it off. Their own private affairs are their own. But thank you for the offer. I will keep it in mind. Myelga, home of the imprisoned crystal, 3 worlds. The human kingdoms of 3 worlds bent the knee, as they were expected to. The Valthorns have completed the assimilation of the Crystal King's power structure, and replaced them. To the nations and kingdoms of the human-dominated lands, they stopped challenging our authority. It was a peace brought about by blood, and a lot of captured men. We sent a few thousand of them to Lavaworld, where a quarter of them died, and the remaining 2 horrified to ever raise their arms against us. Blood on my roots and leaves, and so be it. Peace is here, and it was time to milk the industries of this world into the war machine. My Valthorns quickly identified locations where we could set up manufacturing facilities for crystal bombs, weaponry, and tools. We also began setting up training and recruitment institutes, where the recruits of the Centaur-ruled lands and the humans of the human-controlled lands would train. The humans found the presence of the Centaurs in their lands unsettling, at first. They were enemies, but under the watchful eyes of the Valthorns, they were in no position to attempt anything. Trade and mutual learning happened more frequently. Human merchants, mages and scholars were sent to the Centaur lands to learn from them, and vice versa. Centaur-compatible inns and institutions were set up in the human lands, and the opposite was also true in the Centaur lands. It was an uncomfortable change. But both sides knew that they were now parts of an intergalactic war. It was an uncomfortable realization that the peace of their world was merely an illusion. For many, they chose to believe in the lie. It was a lie that their world was still peaceful. It was also a lie that the 3 hegemons maintained a fragile peace. Many chose to believe the lie. It was easy. To those who didn't, they were guided into our propaganda machine. Through a large recruitment program, talented soldiers from all sides, drafted and recruited. We wanted those who sought more from themselves. To those who didn't like the fake peace, they saw our greater purpose appealing. I liked it that way. They would join soldiers from Treehome, Mountainworld, Tropicsworld and soon, Delvagard. A coalition of forces from all over the multiverse. Your ambitions are great, Janu said. His mummified body floated in what was a quiet, private oasis meant only for him and his guests. It was rarely used, from what I understand, but these days, it is where we meet and talk. You knew that. I responded. I did. But even an immortal like myself cannot truly fathom the scale of what you want to achieve. I told him about my intention of constructing a multiversal force a long time ago. A force to take the battle back to the demons. But as with many others all over the multiverse, it is one thing to have information. It is an entire thing altogether to turn that information into understanding and knowledge. So, my tree, the vessel of my will, wobbled in his little green oasis. There was a small pond, perfectly clear. Beautiful, white sands, more crystalline than dirt. There were tiny insects crawling all over the ground. You have something you want to say. Janu mused for a moment, before he went for the strange question. What do you have planned for me? I paused, before I decided it was best to be honest. I intend to honor our old agreements, look for a suitable world of sand as you requested, and nothing more. This question arises because of the Crystal King. Yes, Janu admitted. It is unnerving to see how you humbled my peer, and now I am uncertain of the nature of our relationship. I decided to reiterate my old stance. Perhaps in politics, as the power balances shift, there are times when I need to speak to those who are my friends, and remind them that they are friends, and not minions. When one party is much stronger than the other, it is only natural that this causes feelings of insecurity. I ask for nothing but mutual cooperation. I do not ask for you to fight for me, and I would like to continue being friends. Friends, Janu said, as if the word was meaningless. In some ways, what meaning did it have? What does it mean to be friends, when we are immortal creatures that lived forever? I would not impose, Janu. I do not intend to. As we expand, our needs will be spread over a wider set of worlds. Janu breathed a long sigh of relief. Very well. I shall take your word for it. Chapter 283. Year 273. The Emperor had aged, when I sent Lumuf to see him. The Holy Emperor's hair had turned white, even though his power and class should have kept him a lot more youthful. It's been a while since we last met, Emperor Erinuel. I hope you've been well. As well as I could be. He waved his hand. His aides and guards left the room. There really was no point to have them here. Really? Lumuf nodded, and decided to joke. It was inappropriate, but no one dared correct him. Your hair seems whiter. Age and the weight of managing an empire, Lord Lumuf. In time my hair will soon fall off. The Emperor relaxed. It's certainly too soon for hair to start falling off. Lumuf countered. The Emperor wasn't that old, was he? He was perhaps 80, or 90. He ascended to his imperial throne around 40 years ago. He laughed. If I lived a leisurely life, without worries, I'm fairly certain my hair would still be beautifully golden. But alas, I struggle to understand how an empire actually manages to stick together, with all the bickering nobles and lords. Lumuf chuckled, and sat on a chair next to him. A tea set was already prepared. The Emperor was more of a coffee person, a relic of the earlier parasite years, but diplomatic channels had data on Lumuf, and indicated he was a tea person. Would you like me to find some ointments and potions for your hair, then? It should be a fairly easy issue to solve. The Emperor smiled at Lumuf's offer. That would not be necessary, my whitened hair is quite useful. It's a good reminder to my nobles that I am an aging man. My mortality helps bring out the schemers amongst the ducal families, and misleads them into thinking that I am a frail, weakened man. Oh, Lumuf laughed. To feign weakness when one is strong, and lure out the schemers is a common tactic. Somehow nobles still fall for it. Their greed and desire for power often overwhelms the warning signs. So, are you here to just taste my tea? Nothing like that. We met Hawa. Twice, actually. Emperor Erinuel sagged. I heard rumors from my informants. It felt so implausible that I'm certain it's an intentional leak. It is. Lumuf chuckled. It's good to see how news travels. It helps us know who's talking to who. Erinuel looked in the distance. All of us play the game. His throne room was necessarily grand. The act of being invited to this room was a spectacle, a ceremony. Something for mere mortals to remember. But to the Holy Emperor, this is no more than a ritual meant to enhance his mysticism. The priest said the regular citizens must be reminded that they stand before the representative of God. A holy emperor. So the throne room was filled with enchantment. For regular soldiers and citizens, they would feel a tremendous weight as they entered. A set of spells and items, meant to enhance the holy emperor's presence. It was exhausting, and Lumuf could see it. He had a role to play, as a symbol of sorts for his empire. His powers as an emperor were strong. It is for this reason his lesser nobles have not tried to assassinate him. The empire would collapse without his presence, and lesser nobles were not prepared to deal with the aftermath and power vacuum. He was not the only holy emperor, and the relationship with the other holy empires were cordial at best, and outright hostile in less pleasant times. Not just that, the threat of the guilds still remained in the background. Though the era of merchant warfare was mostly over, there were still small skirmishes and battles. Little reminders that there are greedy guilds waiting to pounce. So the nobles, despite their greed, dared not shatter the emperor's presence that supported their empire's strength. His skills, and his blessings, endowed his people with strength. It is a countrywide blessing, and worked in some ways, similar to those of my own priests and trees. Harvests are bountiful, mines are more productive, people are healthier, and levels increase a little bit faster. Erinuel sipped the tea. He wasn't a big fan, and Lumuf could tell. Would you like to visit the world where we met Hawa? Yes. Though I suppose my nobles will curse my absence. My blessings fade over time. But I want to go. To see the god I claim to represent. We've known this since the Emperor's visit to the Lava World, and later on, a week-long tour through the Three Worlds and Mountain World. The other emperors were not so keen on visiting. They bought their church's propaganda to a stronger degree than we ever did. A missing king is therefore bad for the country, even if the effects are not felt immediately. That said, there are assassin, spy, and conspirator abilities that could mess with a king's abilities. It is often said that it is better for a king to die in battle, than to die assassinated in his sleep, because the assassin class passively erodes the king's countrywide blessing, while an honorable death in battle is often rewarded by some other form of blessings. Lumuf thought about showing the divine item, but we decided we would keep it. Not now. We didn't want to ruin his first experience of divinity. I will make the arrangements and let you know. Do you not fear your long absence? Erinuel asked abruptly. What do you mean? Lumuf paused. The tea was perfectly warm. The cup was some kind of enchanted cup, that emitted a soft, gentle heat that kept the tea warm. You travel to other worlds, on long missions. Do you not fear for the safety of your homes when you are away? Lumuf found the question amusing. Why? I trust my fellow warriors to keep things safe. Erinuel sighed. I admire that. I can't trust my nobles. Well, except two, but they have their plates full keeping the empire together. It would have been easier if we had a structure that's so immensely loyal. It's something you must build, Emperor. Lumuf advised. This structure was constructed over centuries, layers by layers, built on the backs of many veterans. Only for it to collapse when I die. Then don't. Lumuf smiled. Emperor Erinuel stared at Lumuf as if it was the most ridiculous thing ever. After a while he laughed. I sometimes forget I'm speaking with an avatar. You just need to gain levels. There are worlds out there where you can gain levels. Erinuel paused and looked at Lumuf. Are you suggesting I expand the empire to other worlds? For others it is as close to impossible. The Valtrian Order has complete monopoly over Void Mages. Void Mages is a class that dabbles in the Void Mana, and for younger Void Mages in training, accidental Void Mana corruption and curses still occur somewhat regularly, and so most Void Mages still need to get treated for curses. Even Void Archmages experience mishaps, though their souls are so well attuned to Void Mana that the mishaps are usually minor. So, a senior level Void Archmage wouldn't even think of working for others, due to the sheer gap in resources. Perhaps the angels could entice some of my Void Archmages, but we keep a thorough inventory of who and where each of my Void Mages are. Well, except those that vanished into the void during the demon's comet. My avatar looked at Erinuel, and knew that deploying him on other worlds would be a good way to use his talents. His talents were stagnant here. His powers were used to fight and resist my influence. Here, we were competitors, even if it isn't much of a competition. I would prefer to have his abilities used against the demons or other forces in the peripheral worlds. It'd be a good time to also use my Anointed King class, and see its effects on the peripheral worlds. So Lumuf doubled down. Yes, I'd be happy to facilitate your move, and even provide you with a suitable protective force. We will help get your new empire in the faraway worlds up and running. Erinuel stared at Lumuf as if it was totally ridiculous. You're asking an emperor to leave his empire, and start a new one somewhere else in what's likely to be a war-torn, demon-infested world. Lumuf grinned. Absolutely. It's exciting. Don't you think so? Erinuel closed his eyes. It felt like minutes. His lips curled into a mischievous grin. Well, can't say I'm not swayed. When do we start? And I'd like to see the look on my nobles when I'm appointing an imperial regent. I'll have scribes, painters and mages for the moment. Lumuf laughed. All of them were in full suits of armor, as they prepared for the rift gate. It was a small group, only about 6 of them, mainly just to protect Stella as we made the journey to the peripheral worlds. Stella, Edna, Izar, a druid warheller, a ranger, and an elemental mage. The peripheral worlds required 6 hops, mostly through Hawa's regional worlds. It was likely to be safe, since these were Hawa-controlled worlds, but Edna was with her, just in case. We were not allowed to linger, and though it was a bit of a pity, I understood Hawa's reasoning, and accepted it. So, the goal was to keep moving until we reached one of the peripheral worlds, and because the peripheral worlds were all relatively close to each other, I would then deploy either a clone or a node tree. From there, we'd use that clone and node tree as the base to make further travel, skipping the Hawa's outer worlds entirely. These peripheral worlds were pretty much a cluster of unloved worlds. Worlds too far from the gods, not that far they are out of reach, but far enough that it wasn't sustainable. Still, the pact forced them to protect it. Well, let's start hopping. The first Hawa world was similar to Satria, the presence of divine energies was strong. Just as we arrived, we could feel the strands of divine energy trying to exert itself over us. This was another outer core world. But the 5 worlds after the first world only had a faint, divine presence. There were no laws, like the outer core worlds, and per the data shared by Hawa, these were the regional worlds of Hawa. Then, we were finally at the frontier of Hawa's power bubble. The peripheral worlds. The first peripheral world, Landis. Stella landed first, and we were immediately assaulted by the presence of demons. The astral space of the peripheral world glowed with the Demon King's path, and when we looked to the skies, we saw were filled with flying demons. The welcoming party is here. Stella quipped as the rest of the 6 arrived. Edna was just a short few seconds behind her. Exactly what I was expecting, though. Edna smiled. The flying demons were not that powerful. Perhaps about level 30. She could take them on single-handedly. Node tree. Too early. Stella's senses fanned out, and Edna's own magical senses followed. Divine presence here is minimal. Comparable to Treehome and Mountain World. Of the first 3 worlds, I would rank 3 worlds' divine presence to be a little bit stronger. There is a pact of sorts that governs the 3 hegemons, and there must have been 3 gods that agreed to it, a long time ago. Their presence may have faded due to the distance, but the pact sustains a certain level of divine presence in the world. Edna looked at the demons, and activated a small defensive, illusionary object. It immediately masked her presence. The rest of the crew followed. The first peripheral world seemed fairly war-torn, the terrain around us was charred. There were burnt trees and burnt rocks. Corpses that had long rotten bodies. One of the Valthorns, a level 140 warheller, squatted down and examined the bones. Elven, or at least some kind of elven variant. Dead for at least 4 years. But these burn marks look younger. Stella glanced at Edna, and back. Well, I suppose there should be some surviving civilizations here. Let's go look for them. One of the Valthorns immediately wondered. Maybe they'll be like the Ullurans. Cowered and hiding in their tunnels. The Void Mage nodded, but one of the Rangers began using his scouting abilities. There seems to be some kind of habited location further away. I detect new smoke and the faint smell of cooked food in that direction. Stella nodded. Distance. The Ranger immediately shared the distance, coordinates, and Stella opened a magical portal. The group stepped through, their presence hidden by their illusion items, and on the other side was a fortress that was under attack. They were hidden. There was a group of flying demons above them, about 200 demons and a single demonic champion among them. They attacked the fortress, but for now, their progress was hindered by a decently powerful protective barrier. Well, Edna looked at her fellow teammates. There are living people on the other side, and we have demons attacking it. What is there to do but stop it? The army of flying demons wasn't very strong, and so Izar stood. Let me. He stretched, twisted briefly. Then, his fists glowed, and he began to punch the flying demons with his energy punches. Native Pav. Novorosk. Landis was not always a world infested with demons. But for survivors, like Novorosk, that sort of history didn't matter. They fought the demons for decades, and a life of fighting demons was the only one they knew. Ancient history claimed there was a time when the 5 different elven tribes, the Blood Elves, the High Elves, the Night Elves, the White Elves and the Riverine Elves, all had multiple empires, all incredibly powerful. It was a time when the 5 tribes fought each other for supremacy. It was ancient, and a dream told from the great matriarchs and lorekeepers to the young. There were demons, back then. But each of the 5 empires would have heroes. Elven champions, each of them, and they would fight the demons and destroy them. No lorekeeper remembered when, but there was a time, a few thousand years ago, or perhaps tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago, the heroes began to dwindle. For 5 to 4. Some elves believed that this was divine punishment. The 5 sub-races, all those elven empires were all reckless. The demons' supremacy and the loss of the heroes was due to the other empires' foul behavior. It was an era where elves, already hostile to each other, blamed each other, instead of banding together as one. After all, it was the other empire and elves' fault that the gods abandoned them. The era of war came, and just as the wars between the elven tribes intensified, the heroes vanished. 4 to 3. No matter what the elven tribes did, they fought. They made sacrifices to the gods. They offered worship and prayers. But it was all for naught. The world of Landis drifted further away, unknown to them all. Their gods, far away and silent, did nothing to tell them of the truth. It costs them too much to even send a message. The gods were stretched, and limited faith points were used to support more worlds. The gods supported thousands of worlds each, but to each of these worlds, they know only a single one. Their own. Then 3 heroes became just 2. The demons' presence in the world of Landis became almost permanent. Somewhere along the way, the demons established a foothold in the world of Landis. They claim the vast sands as their home. A land hostile to the elven tribes, and what was once a vast ocean of sands became twisted by the demonic energies that took root. It transformed the sand oceans into the Landasian demonlands. The demon lands spawned demons forever, and what was once in a decade incident became a never-ending nightmare. Then 2 heroes became only 1. The world of Landis only received a single hero. A single hero to hold off against the powerful demons. A single hero who couldn't be strong enough to kill the demon king and live to tell the tale. A single hero that didn't benefit from the blessings of the hero shards. Because there were no other heroes to give him that shard. And it felt like the gods took forever before they sent a hero. The world of Landis was now in an eternal war against the demons. It's been many years since then. The old feuds for the elves gradually faded away, as their intertribal enemies paled before their existential threats. Novorosk prepared for battle. Their home, the fortress of Roskor, was protected by old magics. There were relics left from the earlier era that still gave their fortress city its shields and protections. Their people were ready to die. Novorosk, the leader of the defenders, prepared his bow, his spear, his harpoons. The flying demons were difficult enemies. He could kill a few single-handedly, but there were hundreds in the skies above. It was hard to talk. Each time the claws and fangs of the flying demons slammed into the magical shield, there was a loud humming sound. A life of war meant Novorosk was already level 80. Many in his squad were level 60 to 80, and each of them could kill multiple flying demons. In full strength, this army of demons would not have been a problem for them. But the demons were relentless. They had flying armies by the tens of thousands, and this was the 6th attack in the last week. His men were all injured, wounded by 1,000 tiny cuts, poisoned by tiny droplets in each strike. Even Novorosk himself felt the demon's foul poison in his left thigh. There was a blackened stain that was slowly fading. It would heal in a few days, but the demons didn't give him the time. He'd have to fight without his full mobility. Novorosk, Blood Elven Warleader, watched as a healer tried to soften the effects of the poison. The healers tried to patch up the defenders, as much as they could, but none of them will be at their best today. The shamans drew blood-colored lines, enchantments, on their skin. The leader of the demonic army was a flying demon with a large battle axe. The Blood Elves referred to it as the Axe Leader. Novorosk beat it before. He killed 3 of them in the last year alone. But he wasn't sure he could do it with the poison in his leg. He cursed. A Turk. You'll need to support me. A Turk, his third in command, looked at what Novorosk was looking at and frowned. His face was one of fear. But he wasn't going to let his leader down. Yes, Warleader. A Turk was level 65, and in better times, he would have been a good warleader. The shield wobbled. Novorosk waved his hand, and signaled for the squad to be ready. There were about 70 warriors in his detachment, and another 30 would be supporting from the back. If they could take down the Axe leader, they should win this. It would be at great cost, and Novorosk himself may not survive it. But the fortress of Roskor would live another day. Warleader Novorosk. There are civilians outside of the fortress. Novorosk stared at the shouting scout, absolutely baffled. He tried to run, but his poisoned leg made it painful. The shaman's pain-suppressing lines glowed, and suppressed the pain. But it still hurt. There was a group of 6 adults, and from a distance, Novorosk thought they looked like the white elves of the Snowlands. Where did they come from? Novorosk shouted. Didn't our magical detectors spot them? The scout looked embarrassed. No, Warleader. We did not notice them at all. Is our equipment faulty? Who's in charge of maintenance? Novorosk frowned. The scout shook his head. It shouldn't be. Something is wrong. The second in command walked to the scouting tower. The shields continued to wobble. It likely won't hold for long. Warleader, let's deal with the civilians later. The defenders are ready. At your command. Novorosk sighed. You're right. Civilians who take such risks will have to be responsible for it. The Blood Elven Warleader surveyed the fortress walls. His men were all in position. They were all deathly afraid, but they would not let it affect the fight. Novorosk looked at the second in command. He would be in charge if Novorosk fell in battle. He's a good man, and Roskor would be in good hands. Novorosk tapped the shoulders of the deputy warleader. Take care of yourself. The deputy shook his head. He was armed to the teeth. We'll cover you. Don't be stupid. Novorosk countered, and then stood on the battlements. Get ready. Supporting fire. But they all felt it then. A sudden surge of power that wasn't demonic. A pressure so intense that Novorosk felt the blood in his face drain away. What? They heard sounds. It sounded like a really loud punch. A single swish, and a splat. In the constant humming from the magical shields, and in the noise of demonic fangs and claws rattlings and attacking, they didn't know why the punch sounded so loud. It was as if the only sound that mattered, and all the other sounds were somehow silenced in its presence. The demons exploded. They watched the flying demons felt in the skies above. The axe leader of the demons turned, as if looking for its enemies. But it too splattered into smithereens. Novorosk watched as the strongest of the demonic flying horde turned into mush. The demons were all gone, their bodies splattered all outside of the ground. The deputy turned to face Warleader Novorosk, unable to understand the changing tides. Warleader, what just happened? 284. Greenfield Expansion. Year 273, Part 2. Landis, the peripheral world's eye. Novorosk. The 6 strangers were foreign. Everything about them was foreign. Visitors from beyond the stars. Their weapons were made of wood Novorosk did not recognize, the carvings on their armor and the texture of their steel unknown to them. The way their magic seemed like an endlessly deep lake made the entire army tense up. Everyone knew they were different. The way their ears looked. The scent of their hair. Hello. The woman in armor said first. I am Edna, and these are my fellow warriors. We are the envoys of Eon, and we've come to help. Novorosk looked at the rest of his team. Traditionally, communication would be made in the receiving rooms of the elven cities, but most of the receiving rooms have been repurposed. As accommodation, as a warehouse, as a place for healers. Novorosk cursed and immediately whispered to his second in command. Do we still have a receiving room? The second in command shook his head, he naturally paled at the question. No, Warleader. Quickly, get some men and go clean one of the rooms up. I'll hold them here. Move quickly. The second in command nodded, and ran for it. He hauled at least 10 of his soldiers. Novorosk hobbled closer. My apologies, Visitor Edna. I am Novorosk, Warleader of Roskor. I will have my warriors prepare a receiving room. May we know what you need from us? The Visitor Edna paused, and looked around. The fortress of Roskor was battered, its shields weakened from the assault. There were about 2,000 elves living in this place, about half of them working the farms within the fortress walls. There were about a quarter that looked to be children, and a smaller group, about 200 or so that looked to be much older. Their farms were unique, the plants and vegetables were on stacked platforms. Novorosk's eyes noticed how the visitors seemed to look at the stacked platforms. Did they want food? Novorosk quickly did mental calculations. Their druid farmers produced enough food, but their supply would normally be enough for a week. If they asked for too much, they wouldn't have enough. Edna turned to another woman with jet black hair and a scent of the night. Novorosk wondered whether she was a night elf, but she didn't share any of their features. You've seen something like this, Stella. The woman nodded. It reminds me of vertical farms back on Earth. It's interesting that they resorted to this, because of land constraints. Novorosk immediately cut in. Visitors, our food condition isn't great, but once the receiving room is ready we can arrange for some food. Novorosk felt the visitor Edna's stare, as if she was judging him. She answered, very well, Warleader Novorosk. The receiving room was ready, it was hastily cleaned, and still had the faint scent of dried blood in some of the old, ancient carpets. Novorosk wished they kept a single receiving room proper, but centuries of war meant all space had to be reused. The six didn't seem hostile, but the way they looked at things was intense, and made the entire force feel tense. Are you the ultimate leader of this fortress? Edna asked. Warleader Novorosk shook his head, as the second-in-command brought 3 old elves to the receiving room. Each of the 3 wore a set of robes that looked like they were never worn in hundreds of years. The dust on the robes were hastily cleaned. Novorosk nodded, as he bowed. He struggled to remember the words, presenting the Elder Council of Roskor, Elder Ruzis, Elder Muzzer and Elder Noroskor. The 3 elders nodded, the elder in the center, an old man, took the lead. Greetings, visitors. I am Elder Muzzer, and welcome to Roskor. It's been ages since we used the receiving rooms, so we apologize for the poor condition. Edna looked around, and Novorosk wondered what she'll say. But she shrugged. We've seen worse. So, we are new to this world, so we want to know everything. Do you have a map? Novorosk thought he misheard that. What did she mean by new to this world? But the elders were more composed. Bring the latest maps. All of them. 2 of the elven crafters that doubled as assistants hurried out. The fortress of Roskor had few administrative workers left, most of their populace were warriors and the military supporters like shamans and druids, farmers, healers or crafters. The maps they brought were old and stained, but they depicted a set of cities and areas that were still occupied by elves. The 6 stared at it intently, then one of them took out a large piece of paper. At first, Novorosk thought he'd start to make a copy. But he didn't take out a pen. Map replication. The map was then immediately copied over to the paper. The elders stared, unable to believe the spell that just happened. Novorosk paused, and didn't know there was such a spell. All right. The woman, Edna, said. Thanks for that. Of these cities, how many survive? The elders looked at each other. It's been months since they received letters from the other towns. Novorosk watched as the elder pointed to a set of neighboring cities, and then a set of outer cities. We spoke to some of these neighboring cities about 4 to 5 months ago. We have not communicated with these other cities in the last few years. Edna, the woman, looked at one of her team. Novorosk wondered whether they are the woman's subordinates, because they seemed deferential. What do you know about the greater world? There wasn't much to share. Roskor's focus has been to survive day by day, week by week. For most part, the city mostly managed to remain stagnant. There were periods of time in Roskor's history when they had multiple level 80 individuals, and they were able to expand a bit. They even sent out expeditions, but they never came back. Don't you have message networks? The woman asked. One of the elders paused, as if surprised that the woman knew of such a thing. It's not reliable. There are demonic energy storms that frequently interrupt those message networks. I see. The woman in front of them said. Novorosk watched as the woman began to interrogate them on the history of the world, as if they knew absolutely nothing. They asked about the gods of the world of Landis, and about the different gods, then its history, and its heroes. It really was as if they knew nothing. Eventually, the 2 women, the one that felt like a soldier, and the other one that felt like the knight, looked at each other. Well, thank you for your hospitality. We will be leaving now. Leaving. One of the elders, Elder Noroskor, said. It's dangerous out there, with all the demons. But the 2 other elders immediately looked at Elder Noroskor, and he immediately shut up. My apologies, distinguished visitors, we do not mean offense. We doubt the demons would pose a threat. Edna grinned. It is fine. On behalf of our leader, Eon, this world will be under our protection. You will be hearing of us soon enough. Novorosk's eyes couldn't leave the woman, and in that small, cramped room, felt as if the world shifted around him. There was something about that supreme confidence, a swagger and weight that truly gave that ridiculous sentence credibility. He had long believed that their life in this world was one of endless struggle for survival. But his heart pounded. The world was going to change. He could feel it in his soul. Treehome. Lausanne. Lausanne was in the crowd when Rune and Johann stood before them. There were about 500 Valthorns present, many recalled from a recent tour of service in 3 worlds. With the human kingdoms largely stable, the number of active personnel was reduced and reshuffled. There were many newer, Recently promoted Valthorns. Those previously in the lower level 80s to 100s, and now that they reached level 100, they were ready to join the higher tier of the Valthorns. There were more from Mountain World, too. What was once a really small group of soldiers now grew, thanks to the large recruitment process over at Branchhold over the past few decades. It's been almost 70 years since Branchhold was established, and now the force from Branchhold was a respectable quarter of the total present. In time, Lausanne believed that 3 worlds human and centaur recruits, and also the new Tropics world soldiers would join the ranks. They would have to prepare for another tour of service. The Valthorns were expected to support multiple locations. Delvagard, and up to 15 peripheral worlds, as identified by Hawa. So, ready for a trip to faraway worlds. Kay smiled. The briefing was over, and what came next was for each of the Valthorns to sign up, or abstain. Kay once said that this process was a little like how companies would ask for volunteers to go on faraway outstation assignments, and how it was a common thing in the merchant guilds of Earth. Lausanne found the concept amusing, and nodded. Sounds like there's a lot to do there. If we can make a difference to the lives of the locals, yeah, I am up for it. The golem nodded. Ever the hero at heart. Lausanne immediately glared at the female golem. She smiled. I am joking. Lausanne poked her playfully. You're not. At that point, Kay looked at the counter. They were allowed to sign up immediately, or go back and think about it. Most of the Valthorns would mull on it for a few days. Which world looks good to you? We don't know yet, do we? Lausanne laughed. But the peripheral worlds would be a place where I think I can contribute. At least there should be more demons to destroy. Delvagard doesn't seem particularly interesting to me. It's the safer option, and more suitable for those fond of more subtle types of moves. Another Valthorn spoke, and Lausanne nodded. Not all Valthorns were the warrior types. Some were spies, like Spymaster Intip, and many others were diplomats. Each of them had worlds and situations that best made use of their talents. For Lausanne, she felt she belonged in the battlefields. She longed to fight against demons, an experience now mostly missing from Treehome. Rune and Johann also spoke of the Void Worlds, but the Void Worlds would remain off limits for non-domain holders. The presence of unusual creatures and strange rules meant the Void Worlds were a significantly higher risk to the elite Valthorns, while the peripheral worlds, as unloved, soon-to-be godless worlds, are likely to be free of more obstructive and invasive divine meddling. Lausanne listened as Rune and Johann narrated that the meeting was more to assess the level of interest amongst the Valthorns. The exploration team of Stella, Edna and Izar was still surveying the faraway worlds, and the Valthorn presence would come in once they've established the general details. The initial reports were not encouraging. The earliest departure to the peripheral worlds would happen within days, because the peripheral worlds were all under heavy attack. The elven warrior listened, and wondered whether she'd be able to join the exploration team like Edna. That sounded interesting, and she remembered how she used to explore the other continents of Treehome. She would like to be there. Exploration was one of her other interests. She heard tales of how Valthorns were involved in exploring the various tunnels and caves of Mountain World, and her heart wished she was a part of it. You look like you have unanswered questions, milady. Something on your mind. At that point, Johann was the one that approached Kay and Lausanne. Lausanne smiled back, and spoke her mind. I was thinking about the explorers, and wonder what it'll be like to be one. Johann nodded. If you are interested, I believe Eon would be happy to rotate you to the exploration team. Lausanne agreed. Ah, I will raise it the next time I speak to him. Johann grinned. Few people could answer that way. We look forward to having you with us on the field, Lausanne. From what I know, we'll need almost all our people. Lausanne nodded. It was horrifying. The peripheral worlds were pretty much demon-infested, at different stages of destruction. Yet, she found herself excited at the prospects. Treehome. Eon. Are we involved in the peripheral worlds? Colette and Prabhu asked. They were briefed, naturally, as were Adrian and Kefri. The presence of heroes in these worlds rekindled the idea of a League of Heroes, one that would be managed by K. Yes. The number of worlds involved would require all of you to be deployed, at least to help remove the threat of the Demon Kings. I responded directly. The Valthorns would then come in to sweep up the rest and help rebuild these worlds. I will need you all to step in, if there are any heroes surviving. You will be doing this in your own name. Colette wondered. Or on behalf of Hawa. My own. If Hawa wishes to spread his presence, he can send some of his forces over. We'd be happy to facilitate, but since it's our lives on the line, I've got no intention of letting him get the credit. Colette paused before answering. I see. I'd like to minimize the role of the heroes, simply because their strength is inconsistent. My domain holders all appear much more stable and centered, while the heroes feel like they could snap. Well, maybe except for Colette. Colette's liberated hero gave her a sense of calm and assuredness that the rest of them didn't have. Even her partner had strange outbursts, like when he interacted with Chung. It was a strange thing to feel, even though I personally like talking to Prabhu more than the rest. The heroes all have a switch in them that could trigger without notice and suddenly alter their reactions and behavior. It is for this reason that they are unreliable, even if interacting with them on a day-to-day basis can be pleasant and friendly. They were trustworthy, until they suddenly were not. I didn't want to work with these sorts of requirements. Not in the peripheral worlds, and not when we took the battle to the Demon Sun. So, I intended that the peripheral worlds become a farming location for my Valthorns, and hoped we could elevate a few more of my Valthorns. Once we stabilized the demon situation, I intended to deploy at least 2 clones, in the largest, most populous worlds, and use that presence to transform those worlds. I would like these peripheral worlds as future core worlds, just like Treehome, Branchhold, and what I was doing with the world of Delvagard. The data that came back from Edna and Stella was rather depressing. The first world they were in, Landis, was almost conquered by the Demon King. The Demon King that attacked Landis was some kind of flying Demon King, and Landis itself faced demons with high regularity, apparently records, whatever little that they have left, claimed that the Demon Kings attacked almost every 10 years. They also used to have heroes, but the amount of heroes shrunk quite quickly, and so the condition in their world deteriorated rapidly. It only held on due to the many historical relics left behind by all the different heroes, and the high-leveled warriors that protected their cities. In short, they were perfect as our first base. From Stella's surveys, they really needed help. 285. Interludes. Greenfield Expansion 2. Peripheral Landis 3. Edna and team arrived at the next location on the map, only to find it was already an open-air cemetery. The bodies of elves torn by the flying demons were everywhere. Blood and the smell of rotting bodies filled the air. The elves probably died no more than a few days ago, because the bodies were only beginning to rot. We're too late, Edna said. Izar's shock was brief, because he quickly steeled himself, and nodded. There were things that needed to be done. Let's keep going. We don't want to be late for the next one. Edna looked at the 2 rangers and druids. Wait. Too late to save the cities, but there may still be survivors. Let's search underneath all of this. We should help them before we leave. Just in case anyone's left. The knight's words made the Valthorn druid regain his composure, and spread out his senses. The ranger used a kind of calming ability on himself, and searched. Izar looked at Stella. Lady Stella, send me over to the other locations first. If there are demons, I want to be there. Stella nodded, and the portal world opened. As expected, there were demons. Izar nodded, and he stepped to the other side. About that time, the druid shouted. There's a small group of them hidden underneath this rubble. They are very weak. After stating that, roots and vines immediately emerged from the druid and pierced into the rubble, and began to lift the collapsed structure. A set of roots reached for the semi-unconscious elves hidden underneath. They were injured, hungry, and almost dying. Only 3. But 3 was better than none. Edna got to them, and immediately used a set of potions on them. Their wounds healed, and soon their eyes opened to the sight of Edna's glimmering form. Are we dead? They asked. No, Edna said gently. You're not. The ranger then shouted. There's another few hidden here. They are in bad shape too. The druid and the mage immediately went over, while Stella checked on the first group. From his pocket space, they took out more potions. They continued to search and soon found, in total, 20 survivors. Mostly children and their mothers, hidden underneath the rubble. Many were delirious, but the potions helped with the physical wounds and the shot of food helped with their hunger. Stella immediately opened a portal, and sent them back to the fortress of Roskor. Novorosk was there when the portal opened before his eyes. Warleader Novorosk. These are the survivors from the nearby city. Take care of them. The ranger guided the survivors through the portal. Novorosk stared. What? Just take care of them. Feed them and house them somewhere. We will come back and check. Novorosk panicked, but nodded. Once all of them were over, the portal closed. At that point, Edna then looked back at Stella. Izar's right. If there are other cities, we should go and get to them quickly. The more survivors we can save, the faster we can get this world back on its feet. Eon needs to send more people over, and to all of the 15 worlds. We can't scout that many worlds at the same time. Stella countered. The domain holders must be first to go. The druid's roots immediately rescued another few more elves hidden under the buried rubble. The demons killed indiscriminately. To the demons, the mortals were just obstructions. What the demons wanted was the planet's core. Everything else was unnecessary. Edna looked around. I think we can leave this world to the rest of the Valthorns. Leave Izar here just in case. We must start moving. We don't know what condition we'll find in the other 14 worlds. Each day we waste is another day for the demons to slaughter more of these folks. Many of them do not have our advantages. We need full mobilization now. But us domain holders will need to start hopping. Let's deploy that node here, and we'll use this place as our launchpad. Edna said. We need all the domain holders, in all the peripheral worlds. Stella pointed to the immediate problem. There's not enough of us to cover all the worlds. There were 8 domain holders, excluding Eon, and there were 15 worlds. There were only 4 heroes. We'll have to leave node trees there, and use that to support those worlds where we can't. The heroes will have to step in. We will need to hop extensively. Stella nodded. That wasn't ideal, but it was the best plan they could do with their current resources. 15 worlds also meant some worlds wouldn't have a node tree. Eon only had 9 node tree slots left, after the first one was used on Delvagard. Kappa will have to leave Delvagard. Delvagard's priority should be lower. Edna countered. Lives are at stake. Let's make haste. We can afford to patch it up as we go. Stella nodded. Very well. Let me do so. Izar. The portal led to a horde of demons attacking what was probably a city. It was once. There was already crazy fighting when he arrived. The demons have stained the lands with blood and corpses. Flying demons loomed, as arrows zoomed. The defenders were fighting with their lives on the line. Everyone was fighting. There were children, old elves, all doing their best with sticks and whatever weapons they had. He looked around, and immediately spotted the demon champion in charge. It was one of those axe champions. A large bulky demon with 4 giant wings, 2 large clawed legs, and 2 arms, each with a large burning battleaxe. He fought demons across the worlds, many times, and always found them to be emotionless creatures. If anything, he always thought the demons looked afraid. But it was ridiculous. The demons didn't feel fear. So, he didn't believe it either when he thought the demon champion looked smug. Demons had no feelings. Izar's enchanted gauntlets glowed, as he channeled his domain ability. In an instant, the burst of energy from his fist smashed into the champion, and it splattered to death, unaware what hit him. The death of the demon champion sent the demon army into a wild frenzy, but that was intentional. Izar activated the rings on his fingers, and released its stored ability. They summoned 5 gigantic beasts. 2 lions, and 3 gray wolves, each about level 80 in power. Go and slay the demons. The presence of the 5 giant animals instantly drew the attention of the demons. Without the demon champion, the rest of the flying demons were torn apart by the 5 powerful magical beasts. Izar hopped, and in a single leap he landed right next to the breaking lines. He spoke, his voice carried by the weight of his domain. Stand back. To the defenders fighting for their lives, they did. Izar's gauntlet glowed, and he punched with such weight that all the demons in front of him were crushed in a single energy punch. There was no need to use his domain ability here. He watched as his 5 summoned beasts tore through the demons, and the flying demons fled. Any demon that got close was crushed. Mommy, are we saved? There was an elven boy, who looked absolutely in awe. He was dirty, covered in blood, but her mother was injured. Her mother, an elf, held a sharp, pointy wooden stick as a weapon. Her mother looked around. Everyone did. There was a feeling amongst all of the elves. Disbelief. Hope. Relief. Izar turned. Is this it? Any more demons? The elves didn't know what to answer. So no one answered. Izar realized they probably wasn't in any condition to know. The place was probably a fortification of some kind, but the walls were already destroyed. The elves were fighting their last stand within the city itself, because they couldn't outrun the flying demons. Not that there was anywhere else to go, anyway. The elves looked amongst themselves. There were no leaders left, all that was supposed to lead them died during the battle. The 5 beasts walked closer to Izar, now that their target have been destroyed, and the elves stared in fear. Izar looked back at them. They were creatures tagged to his enchanted summoning ring. One of his many equipments. There was no need to speak the command, high-tier summons are mentally linked to their masters, but Izar said it to assure the elves. Patrol the perimeter. Roar if there are any demons. The lions and wolves roared in acknowledgement, and they ran to secure the perimeter. The elves were relieved to see the creatures move. Bring all the wounded here. I'll help them where I can. Those that can't move call me, Isar said, as the rest of the elves scrambled to sort everything out. But at that point, they obeyed. Isar looked around, and frowned. This wasn't the only world. Isar to Stella. Isar to Stella. This location is safe, but we need to keep moving and hit the rest of the cities. Can you open a portal? Portal incoming. We plan to deploy a node soon to bring more forces over. Domain holders will need to visit all the peripheral worlds as soon as possible to deploy nodes. Isar smiled. It was nice having teammates that he could count on. Acknowledged. Let me know. Isar turned back to face the elves, as Isar checked his inventory. At that point, the portal swirled open, and both Stella and the druid stepped out. Isar, you're needed elsewhere. Fallin will handle the healing and fixing the security. Fallin, the level 130 Valthorn druid, got to work. There are other locations with demons, Stella said, as she prepared to open a portal again. Isar nodded, as Fallin looked at the location. The druid's arms glowed briefly, as roots shot out of his arms. At that moment, a wall of bramble emerged around what's left of the elven encampment. This should protect the location for now. Where's Edna? There's another location. A proper city. It may be under siege. Is it our timing? Why are cities under siege at this time? Isar found it terribly unusual. It is common knowledge that most reinforcements arrive either too early or too late, though in some ways, they are too late. Somehow, so many cities are under siege. Stella smiled. We'll deal with that later. Portal open. Go go go. I'll deploy the node once Eon acknowledges our request. Isar didn't know where and how far he was from Stella, but it didn't matter. He trusted she'll come back for him once it was over. The portal opened and he arrived to immediately see 3 demon champions in the air. 3. How cute. The demons actually saw him this time, and they roared at him. He punched through them. 2 died instantly, and then he dashed towards the 3rd with such speed that the 3rd demon champion briefly looked horrified. He was fairly sure it wasn't horror. Perhaps it was just a survival reaction. It died. The elven city of this location was protected by a magical shield that felt like star mana. A quick glance suggested that this was a fairly prosperous city at one point in its life. But it had a breach. There were 2 more demon champions there, battling the defenders. The defenders here was actually fairly competent. There were 2 level 80+ elven warriors battling against the demon champions, and they looked like they had special equipment from a much earlier time. Stella, I don't think this location needs help. They have hero items. Really? Stella responded through the message. Give me a couple of minutes, I'll send you elsewhere. Got it. I'll make myself useful for a bit. He looked around, and decided to just help their odds for a bit. His domain spread out. Everyone saw Isar glowing midair like a god of war, his fists shimmered with power like the fists of furious heavens. Lightning, fire and the elements each in a single punch. The demons charged at him. Mindlessly. The 2 demon champions trying to break the gates turned to face him, as they soon decided he was the larger threat. They all were nothing before a domain holder. His domain was oppressive to these lesser demons. They died in a splatter of magic. The elven defenders stared at Isar in horror. Isar merely smiled, and decided it was worth it to pitch his presence. He scrambled to recall the name in the map. Greetings, elves of Shorodosk. I come in the name of Eon. You will hear from us soon. The elves looked like they had more questions, but Stella's portal opened. Deal with the remnants, Isar commanded. Stay safe. We will contact you. And he stepped through the portal, and left the elven defenders wondering what happened. Edna. This was supposed to be the biggest city known to Roskor elves, at least, for a few centuries ago. This place was supposed to be the old capital of the White Elves, Nunarnisk. When Edna arrived, what she found was a fortified city that was battered in many, many places. It reminded her of Mountainworld. The same scrappiness in the eyes of the people. The same ruthless desire to protect themselves. Everyone here fought wars. Generations lived to fight, and so their people turned hardy. Tough. They made do with what they have. Because they had no choice. They deserved better, of course. This kind of society destroyed those who didn't adapt to this kind of life. Who couldn't adapt, because they were talented in a field that this world didn't need. A sad thing, but societies like this have to make do. The city of Nunarnisk was protected, just like the other city. There was a magical shield that stopped attacks and blocked demons. But they were also selective, and allowed for the elves to move in and out freely. So, the shields that protected the city didn't work on Edna. She felt its energy wobble. It was weak. It weakened a lot over the years, but the fact that it still held for so long was testament to the incredible power of star mana. Immediately within Nunarnisk's shield bubble was a layer of battered walls made of stone, wood, and whatever rubble they got their hands on. There were guards on all the towers, and everyone looked tense. There were demons, but the demons were not attacking. Instead, Nunarnisk was under siege. There were 5 to 6 demon champions, all seemingly waiting. Edna thought of helping, but realized it was better to figure out what was happening. Edna cloaked her presence even before she went through the portal, and so as she walked through the tired crowds, it was clear everyone was preparing for the next fight. It'll be hard for anyone to see her here. Have we patched the left walls? Edna eventually found someone that looked like a leader, and he was barking orders to the worker men. The elf had armor, and exuded power equal to someone at the very limit of their strength. Most likely level 85. Some of the workers were injured. A lost limb, a limp. They did the repairs, because in a fight, they'd be useless. It was very rare to see amputees and folks with lost limbs in the Valthorns and Valtrian order. Ever since Eon healed Juris limbs many decades ago, Eon made it a point to restore everyone's limbs. Eon even extended the treatment to the general populace, though there was a lottery that was always oversubscribed. The leader turned to face another set of workers. All the folks that can fight are waiting for you, Commander Argo. The man known as Commander Argo nodded. Edna quietly followed. Argo glanced briefly in her direction, but he was unable to pierce her illusion items. There were about 1,000 fighters there, all armed with weapons and armor. Edna's quick glance told her all she needed to know. Half of them were injured in some way, and only about 300 were in full fighting form. Commander Argo soon elaborated on what seemed to be common knowledge to those present. The demons have been waiting outside for the last 1 week after their earlier failed assault. There were more demons coming, and the demons had the city of Nunarnisk surrounded. Commander Argo opted for a defensive strategy. Stay put and keep waiting. Edna listened, and surveyed those present. There were about 7 or so that had a power aura similar to Commander Argo. Level 80 to 85 meant they could take on the demon champions and win. They'd survive this battle. There were enough strong warriors here to survive the siege. Then, as the group was dismissed, Commander Argo was surrounded by that same group of strong warriors. And internal divisions emerged. There were whispers of going against the commander's plan, and the high-powered folks were split in half. Together, they'd survive. 3 of them had enough. We're tired of waiting. We charge out there and break this siege. We need the resources outside our walls, Commander. We cannot hold up like this forever. Argo countered. We don't even know if those resources are still there. The demons could have destroyed it. Then what? We keep waiting and let them destroy those resources. We need the iron quarries and the white iron stones. Our weapons need repairs. Our healers need the white iron stones to make some of our healing tools. We're dying if we keep holding here. Edna thought the conversation was slightly pointless. If she acted, they wouldn't have this issue. But she listened. It was good to know what was going on. Argo frowned. There are 5 axe champions out there. The 4 of you rushing out there is a death sentence. The demons will get us. Separately, the equipment used by the 4 elves were in pretty bad shape. They were battled and scarred, and some of its old magic lost. Then come with us. The city is defenseless. We cannot leave the city defenseless. Argo countered. The shield will hold. The shield will not. Argo said, frustrated. Its energies are weak, and won't last if the demons attack. It'll need time to recharge. Then why are we waiting? We must charge out there and defeat them before they overwhelm us. You're being too careful, Argo. It's time to go out there and defeat them. Argo paused. Can you give me half a day to think about this? The other elves looked at each other. They shrugged. Fine. Commander Argo, well, charge out there, whether you are coming or not. Argo frowned. Please don't do anything stupid. Edna trailed Commander Argo to his own office. There was a small office filled with resources scattered everywhere, and he sat on the only chair in the cramped room. He was talking to himself then. It's always like this. Edna then appeared at the door, as she disabled her cloak. Commander Argo. Argo turned, and his weapon of choice, a kind of dagger, was immediately pointed at Edna. Who are you? Edna smiled. An ally. Well, a potential ally. An ally. Argo looked around. Are you alone? Sort of, yes. But I'd like to talk. About your city, and everything. And what makes you think I'll talk to a stranger? How did you even get here? Argo said, totally unused to the fact that there was a stranger. Because, Commander Argo, I can help. You can. You, alone. Of course not. I am here on behalf of Eon and the Valthorn Order, and we are here to destroy the demons. I've never heard of you. You've never heard of anyone outside your city. Edna corrected. Most communication between cities collapsed due to the constant demonic attacks, as cities turned insular. That's not true. There was a period of peace after the hero Junmark defeated the Demon King 59 years ago. Is it? But how many Demon Kings since then? Edna asked. Every hero that came after is weaker, and fighting against tougher odds as the demons established stronger footholds. Every hero weakened, since they couldn't level quickly with the loss of the low-level habitats commonly used for farming. Heroes could spar to gain levels, but given their situation, he wondered whether the kingdoms would just immediately force the heroes out to the battlefield. Argo looked at Edna like she was an alien. So, what do you want? Tell me the history of Nunarnisk in an hour, and tell me everything. I assure you, I will deal with your demon siege once this is over. You can even watch. Argo had never seen a stranger, but Edna's presence overwhelmed him. His eyes looked at the knight, and thought she was mad. Confident, but mad. Very well. The demons came in huge waves every 10 years. The past few decades, the hero was able to defeat the Demon King, but they did so at great cost. The last attack left the previous hero without one of his arms, and cursed by a dark magic that no one in the entire world could break. Thanks to the curse, the hero couldn't go on and destroy the remaining demons. Instead, he was like a weakened, semi-dying man wishing he could die, but the hero class was too strong. Even severely weakened, no one could kill him. His soul and blessings were still too strong. So, the hero rested in a city of the night elves called Cherski. That was the last communication Nunarnisk received from Cherski about 6 years ago. For Nunarnisk, the demons never really stopped. The Great Deserts, of which there were 7 great deserts, each turned into demonlands and continued to spit out demons by the hundreds and thousands, and so travel between cities became a matter of great risk. Only cities that were really close together could still communicate regularly. There were no gigantic oceans in Landis. Instead, there were 6 great lakes, and at the center of those great lakes were the few bastions of the old elven empires. Nunarnisk lost touch with those old bastions a few years ago. Edna listened, and laughed. Very well, call your men. Call them all to the walls. I, on behalf of Eon, would like to demonstrate our intentions. Commander Argo thought it was rather embarrassing, but when he left his office, the 6 other level 80s were waiting for him. He looked back at Edna, and then towards the walls. To the walls. The 4 that supported the push outwards looked surprised. Let's go. The 7 gathered up on the walls, and Edna followed quietly behind. The rest of them didn't notice her, they were busy preparing for the charge out. The 4 immediately called their own supporters to prepare for the charge. Once they were at the walls, Argo looked at Edna. So, what is it that you want to demonstrate? It was at this moment that everyone noticed Edna's presence. Edna nodded, her cloak vanished to reveal her in shining armor. 2 anti-demon swords appeared magically, and there and then, her domain flooded the city. Everyone felt it, Argo as well. Regenerating guardians. 5 glowing magical knights appeared, and they flew. They were ephemeral objects, and they shared Edna's toughness. They zoomed across the skies, creatures of magic. Creatures made from Edna's domain. Edna looked around. There are demons on the other side, as well. Argo nodded. His white hair seemed whiter, his fair face a slightly greenish pale. Edna's energies wobbled outwards, as more magical knights appeared. Edna's lesser magical summons swarmed outwards, 100 magical knights now took the field. It was a short battle, because none of the demons could even harm Edna's guardians. The 7 leading defenders of Nunarnisk looked at Edna, with both a mix of awe and fear. Well, Commander Argo of Nunarnisk, I am Edna of the Valthorn Order, and we are here to recruit allies. If you agree to join us, you will have our protection, but in turn, we will require you to support our war against the demons. Argo nodded. There was no other word to say. Okay. Nunarnisk is secure, we've added it to the fold. Has Eon approved the node tree's placement? Edna said as the elves of Nunarnisk breathed a rare moment of relief. Stella responded. Yes. Node deployment approved. But we need to decide on a location. Izar, also on the same discussion, added. Just pick a location and start sending Valthorns over. Is there a hero in this world? Yes. Want to arrange a visit? Edna countered. Izar laughed. Let's bet. 100 gold that it's under siege. Edna chuckled. That's a stupid bet. The hero is there. The demons must be drawn to him like moths to a flame. Also, the hero seems to be cursed. Stella frowned. If that's the case, the decision's made for us. Let's place the node tree where the hero is. Send the hero back to Treehome, let Eon work on him, and send him back here to fight. Edna had a feeling what happened on Landis would be a tale similar across all the worlds. 286. Greenfields 3. The Node and the Hero. Edna. On Landis, the elven peripheral world. The portal world opened to the old location, supposed to be where the hero was. Nunarnisk was once the great capital of the White Elves, and so, they retained many old records, stored, luckily, in their underground vaults. The locals gladly gave her a tour of the place, and indeed, there was a time long, long ago when they rivaled even the great empires of Threeworld or Mountainworld. Great empires are but materials to be turned into sawdust in the hands of the demons. Ever-persistent grinding machine. The old vaults were sealed magically. The White Elves hoped that if they fell, the city's history would still somehow remain within these vaults. There were no weapons here, instead, it was all books and records. Paintings. And most importantly, detailed maps. Maps that made it easy for Stella to roughly locate its location. An old white elf, apparently almost 600 years old, volunteered to help them verify the location of the hero's resting place. There was a time, a few centuries ago, when there was a lull in the demon's push. When they lucked out with a hero with the right mix of talent, capability and luck to help beat back the demons and push the balance of power in their favor. During the fleeting era of peace, there was travel between the cities. There was trade that has long vanished. Magical travel was possible during the period, instead of the constant, perpetual disruptions today. Portal disruptions seem pretty common. Stella said. A lot of the messaging and teleportation failure was entirely due to the demon's magical disruption, and for someone like Stella, it wasn't even hard to tell where those disruptive energies came from. The demon's nests in the deserts of Landis were all sources of that disruption. Stella almost didn't notice them, but Stella's portals, that survived the shredding of reality and teleportation on far more chaotic environments like the demon's comet, easily overpowered the disruptions. If they had capable mages, they might have managed to maintain some semblance of a communication network even in spite of the disruptions, but Edna knew that those odds were unlikely. Talent needed the right circumstances to flourish, and even today, even with the huge talent infrastructure of the Valthorns, mage training remains slow. Faster than before, but still, slow. And so the portal opened, to a field of destruction and burnt wood. Ash. It was a lake, once upon a time, but it has long since dried up. There were bodies filled with the corpses of the dead, though demons rarely left corpses. They decayed way too quickly. There were champions in the distance, hammering at what appeared to be a magical shield. The shield protected a cherry tree that has long since withered and without a single leaf or flower. There is an injured hero within that tree's little space. All around the shield was just endless, endless destruction. The white elf collapsed on the ground and wailed. This entire place it used to be a large city. 100,000 high elves once walked this land, and now, all that remains is the sacred cherry of the First Estate. Edna and Stella's eyes both scanned the demon-filled surroundings. There certainly didn't seem to be anything resembling a city here. It was just a series of craters, whatever civilization didn't leave any structures or infrastructure that survived the demon's attack. The champions all hammered away at the shield. The shield did not break. The shield did not bend. But they both could sense the attacks chipping away at its strength. Slowly. The shield could last a few more years. Since I am here, Edna said, as she jumped and landed not far away from the flood of demons. I might as well play. Her quest swords appeared by the tens, and the knight's magical summons soon appeared to accompany her. What were champions before a domain holder? Stella created a shield around herself and her guide, the old white elf. Edna's blade shone like the fury of the stars. In the land that was once the First Estate, light returned, and ended centuries of darkness brought about by the demon's champions. In what was no more than 10 series of flashing lights, the army of demon champions crumbled. The pounding of the shield ended, and an eerie silence returned to the land. Even the wind seemed to stop. Edna's footsteps felt like the marches of a million soldiers. She walked to the gigantic cherry tree that's all withered, and felt the presence of a heroic shield. Eon would be pleased to find another spirit tree out here. Edna said. Her quest swords vanished into their own magical space. Stella looked at the white elf guide. Please return to Nunarnisk. The white elf wanted to stay, but he dared no object. Please don't hurt the sacred cherry. It is one of the most sacred places for all of the high elves. Our ancestors have offended the gods enough, I do not wish to offend them further. Stella found that amusing. All the briefings they received suggested they were all enemies. Rest assured, if the sacred cherry is not our enemy, it would not find us a threat. The white elf went back through the portal, and Stella teleported up to Edna. With not a single demon in sight, the withered cherry tree stood before them. So, do we talk to it? Stella asked. Or do we require Lumuf's presence? Connect roots and stuff. I thought you said we'd just deploy Ian's clone here and be done with it. Edna teased, but the nature of their work meant most plans had to be adjusted. Reality and plans were not good friends. A root emerged from Edna's body, an ability of Ian's familiar. It pierced the dirt around them, and made contact with the roots of the cherry tree. The sensation was immediate, like two minds touching. But her domain protected her, while the counterpart was unprotected. Domain blocked attempted intrusion. But they could still speak through the connection of roots. Greetings. Edna's words were transmitted through the roots from her body. All she felt was a weak whimper from the other side. Its thoughts were slurred and weak. Edna could feel the vulnerability, the frailness in its energies, and so she tapped into the familiar's healing powers. Though nothing like the real thing, the effects were immediate, as the flow of healing energies into the cherry tree reinvigorated the withered plant. Its branches and trunk gained color that was lost, and small cherry buds began to emerge from the tips of its branches. New leaves spawned from the tips of the tree. It took about 10 or 15 minutes, but the cherry tree no longer withered. Stella smiled. Well, this time, the reply from the cherry tree had strength that was once lost. I greet our rescuers. Our gratitude knows no bounds. The cherry tree's voice was like the whisper of a gentle old man. Edna looked around. I was told the hero is here. The hero lies within, nursing his curse. The hero is cursed. Edna recited from experience. His soul feels as if he's wrestling against the darkness. There is demonic poisoning within his soul. A curse that tainted his soul, a mark that blemished his once pristine soul spring. He may even have voices in his mind, whispering demonic words. You have seen this sickness. Edna felt the cherry tree's surprise through their root connection. The knight grinned in amusement. Things repeated. She understood why Eon once said that what was possible is pretty much a certainty to occur. Once they visited enough worlds, it was inevitable that they would meet those with similar circumstances. We have someone that can heal the curse. Edna looked at Stella. We need Lumuf here. Stella caught on. On it. The rift gate opened, though momentarily Edna detected the cherry tree's defensiveness. It must have suspected this was the demon's work. The priest stepped through the rift gate, and the earth itself around them seemed to spring forth with life. Plants, grass spawned as if spurred on by the world itself, and the cherry tree's buds bloomed. What was a destroyed field turned into a field of young grass. Well, where is the patient? Lumuf asked. Within. The cherry tree answered, and Lumuf nodded. The cherry tree's bark bent magically, and a door opened. Secret hideout, Lumuf said as he approached the room. It was a tiny space, much smaller than the labyrinth within Ian's true body. Edna followed closely behind and saw an elvish man strapped to tree vines. One side of his arm turned black from the effects of the curse, a familiar old rot from a far older time. She saw something similar in Ian's dream academy. Lumuf touched the elvish man, and he felt Lumuf's domain focus. It was instantaneous, because Lumuf's energies grabbed something within the elf hero, and pulled. The demon's curse was ejected forcefully, a festering parasite that Lumuf grabbed and pulled out of his soul. It immediately transformed and attempted to take the form of some kind of demonic spawn. Edna's blade was through the spawn's body, and her shining blade destroyed it instantly. The removal of the demon's curse restored health to the elven hero instantly, as the darkened skin on the hero's body regained color. His face that was once in pain instantly relaxed. Lumuf, Edna and Stella stood, and allowed the hero to sleep. Well, I was told there are many other worlds like this. Lumuf looked at Stella as the three domain holders rested outside the cherry tree. Should you start moving? Stella shrugged. Well, yes, but we couldn't leave things in their current state here. And since we are familiar with this place already, we might as well finish what we started. You are like us. The cherry tree spoke abruptly. Lumuf stopped. Ah yes, I did not introduce ourselves. We are from the Valtrian Order, and we are an organization that aims to defeat the demons across the multiverse. We were asked to come here, to shore up the locals' defenses, as the old god's presence fades. You are a tree. The cherry tree emphasized. Edna and Stella chuckled. Lumuf shook his head. I am not a tree, I am merely the avatar of one. There is no difference. Oh, there is a huge difference. Lumuf countered. We have authorization for deployment. Lozon sat quietly in the vast meeting room when the commander and strategist presented the layout. Our destination is Landis, and based on the map retrieved, these are the identified settlements. Each team of 10 will visit 30 locations, defeat demons, rescue survivors, help restore some basic semblance of civilization, and report back. Lozon nodded, as the teams of 10 were formed. All in all there were 20 teams. Nice to see you again, Aben. Lozon smiled. Aben, the Eonic Battle Knight, shook her hand. Glad to serve with you. It's been a long time. Aben served as a knight for many decades, though he did take a break. But he was also one of those who was stuck in the high-level 130s to 140s, unable to push on. Then, a centaur approached. Aryan. You're on our team too. Aryan nodded. Hallowed company indeed. Eon's princess and the old black knight. The centaur peeked behind Lozon to find another woman. And a Ma tree arch. Lozon turned and bowed before matriarch Hoya. I was not aware you were participating in this round of exploration. Hoya smiled gently. There are younger priests to handle affairs on Treehome, and things are stable here. How could I resist diving into the deep end and see what it is like? I would have to trouble the rest of you to be my bodyguard. Lozon chuckled. Hoya was a triology matriarch that served for decades, and she doubted the woman needed protection. Not with her own natural set of blessings. 6 other Valthorns joined the 4, and they were all in the level 125 and above. It wasn't the first run for most of them. The announcement came immediately that evening. All right, the node tree was deployed, get ready for transport. Equipment ready. Final checks. Lozon checked her own backpack, and her spears. Her group would be led by Aben. He was technically the most experienced one here with a long history of deployments to strange new worlds. Aben glanced at his team, and they all indicated their readiness. Well, let's go. About 250 will be teleported over to Landis, but 50 of them will be around the node tree. The node tree in the outskirts of Nunarnisk. Good luck. Another survivor here, Hoya said, as she helped a young boy out of the hole. There was something about visiting a world where death is so commonplace, that survivors seem like a miracle. Lozon wondered how the boy survived in that hole, but such perilous circumstances often seemed to create miracles. Are you angels sent by the gods? The young boy asked when he was much better. It almost seemed like all of them were surrounded by a halo. Lozon shook her head, even though she could see why the boy thought so. No. She remembered that conversation with Kay, how she was a hero in her eyes. She looked around, at her team, and saw they too had similar emotions. No matter what they said, in the eyes of these survivors, the team were heroes. Alright, let's send them to Roskor. We need to keep moving. More places to go, Aben commanded. This was their 6th location, and almost all of them were just ruins. Most survivors lucked out, somehow trapped under rubble but not yet dead. The others hid and ran. The rangers found many survivors this way, hiding in what remains of the forests, in caves or holes throughout the land. Of the marked locations, they found a few somewhat intact cities. These cities and towns were all lucky, because long ago, the heroes left defensive items for them. Some ruins were just filled with dead people, dead for years, if not decades. The 7th location was a field of death. Destruction claimed the land from long ago that plants began to grow from the ashes. This is what our world could be like. Hoya said quietly. Aryan merely tapped the matriarch's shoulder. Don't dwell on it for too long, priestess. Our focus is on rescuing survivors, if any remain. Lozon remembered a similar scene on the eastern continent. The demons didn't get a chance to destroy freely, because Eon existed. If the locals could not defend themselves, the solution was obvious. Eon needed to be everywhere. They needed to be everywhere. Lozon realized later that day that being everywhere was a lot harder than they expected. They covered 11 locations that day, and gave themselves 4 hours to rest. They would need to keep moving. The domain holders will be moving to another world. Aben spoke when they woke from their rest. New orders. They expect that only 4 or 5 teams will remain in this world to support the natives by the week's end. We need to start making substantive improvements to this world's defenses, as soon as possible. What? Hoya said. But we just came here. There are 15 worlds to reinforce. Treehome expects to send lower-leveled Valthorns over to support those that remain. Aben said. Let's keep moving. We won't be able to rest much. The 7 surviving domain holders had to split up, and form 3 teams. Edna and Stella left Landis behind, and arrived in the next world. Lumuf and Kaffa were sent to another one. Johann, Rune and Izar to the 4th peripheral world. All 3 teams found more worlds at stake. All these worlds were under attack by the Demon Kings. Some were almost all lost, and in others, the heroes were significantly less and weaker from their earlier days. They were weakened, because the demons employed demonic curses extensively in all these worlds. Demonic parasites, demonic curses were found even in lesser beings, but these lesser beings died quickly. They are pulling the teams there already. Hoya's exasperation was immediate. Don't we have people on Treehome? Too low-leveled. Aben countered. The Valtrian Order as a whole had about 3,000 level 100 and above individuals. A huge amount that meant the Valtrian Order far outclassed the powers of every other party in Treehome, Mountainworld, and 3 worlds combined. It was, in every sense of the word, a monumental sum. A fighting force to fear. But, about 1/3 of these are non-combat classes. Crafters, enchanters, builders, merchants and lords, mage researchers, trainers and teachers. So, effectively, only 2,000 level 100 individuals that were ready for deployment. There was also a need to maintain standing forces on 3-world, Mountainworld, and Tropicsworld. These 3 worlds' security situation required a larger staff strength. That eliminated another 1,000 or so level 100 individuals from deployment. If they stretched it, they could reduce the number to 500. So, at any one point, only about 1,000 to 1,500 or so level 100s could be deployed as an expeditionary or peacekeeping force, supported by a larger population of lower-leveled Valthorns. The high-level math was obvious. If there are 15 worlds like this, we can only deploy about 70 to 100 level 100 individuals per world. It seemed like a big number, but each of these worlds were large places. These 70 Valthorns would definitely turn the tide and trivialize all lesser threats wherever they went, but they couldn't be everywhere. It wasn't large enough to cover all the places that needed help. It will have to do. Aben said. The support force of those below level 100 would have to fill up the gaps. The team sat and processed Aben's update. Lozan looked around them, and wondered whether there were enough of them to reach these worlds in time. Let's keep going. We might have to depart for another world once we're done here too. They visited location after location in a rush, and finally, when they stopped at the last marked location, Lozan stood over a corpse that was still warm. A young elven woman gored to death by demons. Maybe if they reached the place an hour earlier, she would have lived. No use thinking about it. Aben sat next to Lozan as they ate some of their rations. There were few animals or wild creatures to hunt for food, and most forests were destroyed. The surviving cities all had their own specialized farms, supported by their local druids and farmers. We just have to keep going. Lozan didn't like the feeling of helplessness. What price would she pay if she could save more people? No, what would she sacrifice to end this war? Maybe that was Eon's question. She knew Eon sensed it all. Eon could see this. He absorbs the spirits of the dead by the hundreds, thousands, maybe even millions. Why would he not make a deal with the devil to end this slaughter? How many of us are left on Landis? Lozan asked. 6 teams remaining. The other 14 have been summoned to leave for the other worlds. More are getting ready. Lozan looked around them. Hoya helped some of the injured with her healing powers. Her blend of priestly and familiar powers meant she could fix most injuries instantaneously. Thanks to the combined efforts of all their teams, they've constructed a revised map of Landis, indicating all the surviving cities. Of the 6 great capitals of the elves, only 3 remained. The other 3 were razed into the ground by the demons. Nunarnisk, Atarusk and Sorakor were the 3 last elven capitals that stood in some way or form. Alright, Lumuf and Kaffa have left the world, Aben said suddenly. It was a matter of fact update. Wait, it's been barely a few days. Lozan thought. Their world was in such terrible shape that there wasn't much left to help. Aben recited the communications that came through the network. Updates on the peripheral worlds were given regularly to each of the team leaders, along with updates on the domain holder movements. Did they deploy a node? No, not yet. Aben countered. What are our orders now? Lozan wondered as one of the druids helped create a reinforced wooden rampart for the survivors. They would survive. They've eliminated almost all the demons they could find. None yet. At this point, Treehome commands leaving it up to the rest of us team leaders to decide what to do. Lozan's instincts were simple. If the overarching goal was to reinforce the natives, then they could also accomplish that by weakening the demons. We have two main choices that maximize our presence. We strike the demons' bases in the deserts. Clean up the shit that was left behind, and reduce the frequency of demonic raids on the surviving natives. Or we support the elf heroes' retaliation. Aben nodded. The elf heroes in Treehome for now. So the heroes' retaliation will have to wait until he returns. Let me talk to the rest of them and build a strike force. 287. Greenfields IV. 287 The Elven Hero on Treehome. Novorosk. In Freshka, Treehome. Everything about the place was surreal. Novorosk looked around, and had never seen a city like it. It was massive and filled with creatures. Talking lizards and horse people. But more importantly, were the people that came along with him. People he didn't think he'd ever see. Novorosk of Roskor couldn't believe the people he met. You're the hero. The elf man was gorgeous. He had features of the high elves, long light blonde hair that was till his waist, elvish ears, and handsome features that made the females present stare. He sighed, and somehow he managed to look good while sighing. Yes, not a good one. I am Samuel, or since I've come here, I go by the name Samahiro. This way. There were chauffeurs, attendants that led the group of 20 or so leaders of Landis to a large tunnel. The city was overwhelming to them, and all of them were dazed. Novorosk looked at the mass of people and immediately wondered how they were fed and housed. Except Samuel, who looked at the city wistfully, as if remembering a life before his current one. Novorosk was next to a lady with pale gray skin and equally gray hair. Among the elves, they were sometimes referred to as the Drow, but they referred to themselves as the elves of the night. The woman and Novorosk exchanged glances, as if sizing each other up. Commander Argo, the leader of the White Elves of Nunarnisk, greeted the rest of them. The fact that so many senior members of the various elven cities could gather made the commander look as if he wanted to cry. Are you all right, Commander Argo? Novorosk asked out of concern. He rubbed his eyes. I just cannot help but feel a little teary, that the leaders of the various elven cities are allowed to meet under much gentler circumstances. This moment should be recorded. The first gathering of the elven leaders after a period of darkness. The woman was surprised. I believe it is too hasty to consider it the end of darkness. That statement made the rest of them freeze. It was true that they now have hope, but they were not out of the darkness yet. Samuel, the elven hero, laughed. Look around us, lady. We are in an entirely different world, and we face a force clearly geared for war. If this is not the end of the darkness, then what evidence do you need? At that moment, a woman in a dark green uniform stepped out of a gigantic door. Greetings. Eon is ready to see you now. Hero Samuel, you will have an additional, separate session after the meeting. The beetle led them underground, through tunnels and vines, but strangely, it felt as if the earth's pulse gained strength. The blood elves of Roskor were particularly sensitive to energy flows, particularly spiritual energy. It is spiritual energies that powered their blood runes and blood marks, and so the overwhelming presence of spiritual energy in the tunnels was a strange surprise. What's going to happen? The night elven woman asked the uniformed lady. You will meet our god, the leader of the Eonic pantheon. The night elf frowned, as if there was disbelief. They then saw the valley, with the pulsing trees and the flowing energies. The place pulsed, as if each of the trees possessed a heartbeat. There were streaks of light, as if the stars and meteors were trapped in the trees themselves. We are here. The beetle stopped in a gigantic courtyard, and in front of them was the biggest tree they have ever seen. Then he felt it. His attempts to look at the tree was met with a sensation as if a million eyes were upon him. His mind was immediately sucked into a maze of trees, and he felt lost. Novorosk didn't know how long he was in there, but then. You all right? Samuel asked. Novorosk suddenly felt himself pulled out of the maze, but what replaced it was immediately a sense of scale. He looked at the tree, and thought for a moment like he was looking at trees in other places, and the more he tried to look at it, the more he felt like his mind was being pulled apart. His knees buckled, and quickly, he averted his gaze. The rest of them stared at the tree, and only to all kneel, their heads unable to look at the tree anymore. Greetings. The voice was in their head, and Novorosk felt his skin tremble. His hair stood on its end, as if that voice whispered right next to him, from both his ears at the same time. No, it was as if a choir spoke to him all at once. Samuel the hero heard the voice too, and looked around, as if searching. Greetings. Who are we speaking to? I am Eon, the gigantic tree right in front of you. Welcome to my valley. I have asked my people to bring you here for many reasons. Mainly, I asked for your cooperation. Samuel was the only one who could look back at the tree. Novorosk's attempts to even glance at its roots immediately awakened that feeling from before. How? Why? The lady mentioned that the tree was everywhere, and yet in this valley, why was the sensation so intense? Anything you command, Novorosk answered, as if his soul compelled himself to answer. Just being here imprinted the tree's presence in his soul. He would never forget. What is it? Samuel asked. I will establish the Valthrian order, on your world of Landis. We will help you rebuild, if you let us. But, we will also ask some among you to fight for us, and we will choose those willing and talented among you, to take this fight beyond your world, and further into the stars. Novorosk realized then that this was a conscription. Eon intended to turn their world into one that supplied soldiers. Who are we fighting? Samuel asked. The demons, of course. The night elven woman asked. Are you sent by the gods? There was a moment of silence, before the tree answered into their minds. Your old gods are drifting away. I am here to take their place. Samuel was the only one standing. Why? Time, and expansion of the multiverse. Novorosk didn't understand it, but Samuel did. He looked at the tree and sighed. Can you send me back home? No. I am not the one that brought you here, and so, I cannot send you back. Then who did? Samuel asked. Hero Samuel. You will have another session later to speak to me privately. And with some other individuals that you will work with, if you choose to cooperate with us. To the rest of you, do you agree to assist my people as we settle in your world? The night elven lady answered. I cannot decide on the behalf of the rest of my people, but I will try my best to convince them to agree. Commander Argo answered with a firmness he never exhibited back in Nunarnisk. Yes. We will support your people with all our might. The rest of them nodded without hesitation. Yes. Novorosk wondered how much of their answer was fear. They were ants, and the tree in front of them was the finger of God and could crush them if it so wished. It was a sensation he couldn't shake. A savior has come to their world, but their world will be reshaped in their savior's image. The guide helped the rest of them out, and they were all relieved to be brought far, far away from the gigantic tree. Novorosk sat, and thought. His world will change. It will change into a world made to support this god's war. For once, they were no longer helpless victims of war. This will be a better life for his people. For most of them, as the beetle brought them out of the valley and into the larger city, he realized that they now have a hope to live a life like they once did, and better. The various elven empires would be remade from what was left behind. For most of them, this will lead them to prosperity. But, he also noticed the soldiers of Tree. The short-eared men and women, lizard people and horse people, all draped in weapons. They were strong, but he saw in their eyes a look he recognized. These were people who lived a life of war. Never-ending war. Some of his own people will have to make the sacrifice for the rest of them. They will be transformed into pawns, to be deployed where the tree saw fit. Some of them will be expendable pieces. It is a sacrifice. The few will have to bear the burdens of the many. Novorosk looked at the prosperity outside of the beetle carriage's windows, and felt the imprint in his soul. If asked, he will be the first to raise his hand. Eon. The elven hero fidgeted quietly. He was nervous, and he had a lot of questions. But I decided to ask mine first. I wanted to hear from him directly. How did your first battle with the Demon King go? Samuel paused, and shook his head. Bad. The Demon King was some kind of flying demon, while I am an archer. It should have been a decent matchup, but the Demon King's armor was so strong, and he possessed so many poisoned axes. All Demon King's attacks are poisoned to some degree. It is the nature of their energy. The demonic curse infects all that survive their attacks. I briefly remembered that I was even poisoned by the demon's curse in the first few decades in this world, and it took years to remove it. The second time I was cursed, it was from the demonic mana, and that required my domain to free myself from its effects. Samuel didn't know that. Really? Are there no surviving records in Landis? Samuel shook his head. I am not sure, and I also didn't think about it. There were no one left to man their stores or archives. The elven nation was battered when I came, and the Demon King struck when I was only around level 90. I was not ready. That was plausible. If the gods summon teenagers, they might lack life experience. If they summoned teenagers who didn't have much agency and mostly went along with the flow, they likely would not think too much about their strategy, and would not seek out information. At that point, I introduced the 4 heroes. I teleported them in via my ability. Samuel, let me introduce the 4 that will now assist you. Adrian, From Mountain World, Kefri, from Three World, and Colette and Prabhu. They are fellow heroes. Samuel's eyes brightened, and his own senses immediately detected that they were like him. Colette stared at Samuel, and immediately said, "Wow, you're so pretty. You're even more pretty than all the other elves I've seen. You're like what I imagine an elf should look like." Kefri nodded furiously. "You look like a doll." Samuel blushed. I am sorry. This is the look they gave me. I didn't look like this originally, but." Kefri cursed. Her annoyance at her appearance never faded. "You lucky bastard. They made you a beautiful elf. They made me into this scorpion shit." Samuel sighed. "Milady, I wish we could have traded places. This form did nothing but harm to me. The unwanted attention from the native elves just made life hard. I know we just met, but to me, suffering from this ugly ass shit form, that sounds like UGHH. Kefri countered. "These four are heroes, just like you, and they will help you with the battle against the Demon King in Landis. I will have one of my domain holders support you." "One." At that point, Kefri asked. "The rest of them are exploring. Can they come back after they've done the initial exploring? I think this pretty boy still needs to gain some levels. He feels kinda low level." Kefri countered. "Acceptable. We may choose to liberate Landis once the rest of my domain holders visit all the 15 worlds." At that point, Samuel interjected. "Sorry, what is this about 15 worlds?" Colette answered. "The gods intend to abandon 15 worlds, so Eon's tasked with taking over. In short, there's been a big ass mess that's got out of control, and these guys are the professional cleaning crew sent in to take over." "Shit, how can they do that?" "Apparently, not much of a choice," Colette said. "Gods have a limited range." Samuel sat there and looked at the other four. "If the four of you are here, it means there's no way back, isn't it?" Colette shook her head. "Death. The spirits of the dead heroes tell us death leads us back home." The elf hero stared. "How?" At that point, a Valthorn centaur guide appeared. The centaur spoke. "The journal room awaits." The elf hero touched the journal as expected, and for a moment, all was well once more. "Lausanne, Landis. Found them." Lausanne spoke over message. She was high up on a tree that she made, and she saw the flying demons in the distance. The operatives, spread all over the world of Landis, reached most of the known cities over the past 2 months. Death in demon form came to 2/3 of them, and only 1/3 of the known cities remain as actual, habited locations. The rest were ruins. Dead. Destroyed. It was sobering, but it steeled her determination. No, it steeled everyone's determination. Sites of thoroughly ruined cities, cities where survivors died because no one came to help them, reminded them of a state possible if they fell. The devastation brought back memories of all her earlier campaigns. The Order is ruthless. The Order is sometimes cruel. The Order can be callous. There were sacrifices made for power, but all this merely reminded them that their cause is true. This was an enemy they must defeat. Team leader Aben landed next to her, then a mage followed. The mage created spears of ice that flew towards the flying demons, and they died instantly. "All right, let's move. The desert's not going to clean them up themselves," Aben answered, as the Valthorn force landed closer. The Valthorn's extensive counterattack brought a moment of quiet to the cities, while Valthorn druids and operatives constructed new defensive formations. The now destroyed city of Chersky, and home of the sacred cherry, became the new home of Eon's node. There was already a small force of builders constructing fortifications. An army of beetles and spiders marched behind them. Beetles outfitted with projectile weapons, fired from the abdomen. They have quite a few deserts to clear, before the heroes attempted to battle the Demon King, now hidden deep within the tunnel to the core. The Demon King's journey to the core would take a few years. Edna and Stella, the second peripheral world of Sarpi. Edna and Stella arrived in a world of fire and ice. Plumes of smoke from volcanoes poured into the sky above. Demons were everywhere. The first habitation they found was a group of lava people. They were humanoids, but with skin resembling fresh lava. They built their homes in a cave where rivers of lava flowed. The demons were of the traditional kind. Fiery, with horns of flame, wings of flame, and axes of flames, accompanied their fire-breathing Cerberus and hellhounds. They were a terrible matchup for the lava people. The lava people's fire weapons were resisted by the demons, while the demons overpowered the lava people with sheer brute force. From the lava people, or as they called themselves, the Arpic. Edna and Stella then learned of the Snow people, the Sarluk. The people who were once the lava people's mortal enemies, but they've found peace with each other after a while. It significantly helped that the two races of the world of Sarpi did not really contest the same territories. The Snow people live in the cold poles of the world, while the Lava people live in the warm central bands, and the areas where they intersected were populated by the mixed bloods, known as the Chong. The Chong were sort of pariahs to the two sides, who preferred the purity of their own race. The Chong were people that resembled humans, and unlike the Snow people who retained some innate control over the powers of ice, or the Lava people who had innate control over fire, the Chong had none. Still, as Edna and Stella surveyed the land, they eventually visited the Snow people, and found that many of the Snow people's great cities and nations remain unscathed. The fire demons that so easily overpowered the Lava people were weakened by the hailstorms and blizzards of the Coldlands, and were easy pickings for the Sarloop defenders. Even the demon champions were battered by the strong blizzards, and the strong natural coldness severely hampered their ability to expand into the cold north and south. The Demon King didn't care. There were no heroes in the world of Sarpi. The last two heroes died about 4 years ago. The last two heroes were born to the Chams, and sadly, due to their pariah status, did not receive much support from the Sarluk. Even their death did not affect the Sarluk or the remnant Arpiks. Instead, after the victory, the Demon King dug into the depths. It had not succeeded in claiming the world, yet, but it would happen eventually. Prosperous Sarluks, and a battered, impoverished Arpiks. The Sarluks saw no reason to help the Arpiks in their warm, volcano-filled lands. It was also a land that was disadvantageous, they were weakened by the heat of the central lands. Life is unfair, Stella said at the end of their visits. It always is, Edna said. Let's help the Lava people and the Chom, and we'll end it there. The Sarluks don't need us. Stella nodded. Selfishness, Stella said. It seems it is a common thing throughout society everywhere. Edna nodded, but the Sarluk had their own reasons. The warm lands of the Apriks were not friendly to the Sarluk. It won't be the last we see, Edna said. But let us keep moving to the others. They didn't have much time to spend here. Not yet, anyway. They needed to complete a quick reconnaissance of the remaining worlds. Only then, the Order can form a coherent strategy on how and where to place the rest of Eon's nodes, clones, and the rest of the Valtrian forces. 288. Greenfields v. The third peripheral world, the Dead World. Lumoof landed in the third peripheral world only to find a world without survivors. This was a dead world, there was no one here, and as far as he extended his senses, it was all demons. It was a world at the very edge of full conversion into a demon world. Not a whiff of mortals. He sighed, and spoke to Stella. Send me elsewhere. Already. This world is dying. I sense no survivors. Are you sure? Stella said through their shared communication network. Lumoof spent another few days scouring the world and found nothing. Ruins. Death. Corpses that were easily a decade old. There were some trees, some vegetation that survived the destruction wrought by the flying fire demons. Is it me, or are there a lot of flying and fire-type demons? Lumoof asked. Stella, are you going to investigate the originating demon worlds? Later Stella said. Still moving. Lumoof looked at his partner for this mission. How was your stint on Delvagard? Kaffa shrugged. Nothing much. I am glad to be reassigned to the front lines. Delvagard is the front lines. Lumoof laughed. Not for me. It is for the Dwarven Lords, and perhaps alchemist Alka. A pity. Alka would have loved the place. Or hated it because it has too many damned dwarves. Kaffa related with the response, and chuckled along. I feel that way whenever I am in Wetport Lapool. That's racism against your own kind. The priest teased. I didn't say our kind is without flaws. Kaffa smiled. There wasn't much to do in this world except destroying demons, so the two domain holders took the time to catch up and chat. Nothing threatened them. 10 demon champions were nothing before a level 200 avatar. My people are still changing, and it'll take a few generations. The priest understood it keenly. The hearts of the people are often hard to change. He could preach the truth, show the evidence, and some of their hearts would still deny it. The heart believes in what it believes, and it is a primal thing. It is why the Central Continent's priests and the Order tried very hard to reach the young children and embed their values as soon as possible. It is something the parents resisted. After all, some of them believed the children should be free to make their own minds. But Lumoof, as an avatar of a rising god, saw it differently. The truth in the heart of the people needed to fit reality. The beliefs they hold must match the society's needs and wants. They tried to step in where possible, and it is why orphans were so often roped into their circle of influence. It's an area where Lumoof frequently disagreed with Stella, who believed in the independence of mind. Thankfully, Stella was a void mage, and her views did not affect how the trilogy approached the issue of education and shaping society's cultural zeitgeist. They had to. The society needed to be ready to fight wars. The society of Treehome must accept and believe in the cause. The society as a whole must possess the industrial and military capacity to support a war throughout the multiple worlds. Perhaps someday, Stella's view of the world could come true. A world where beliefs develop organically. A wartime government has no choice but to make choices differently, compared to the government of a world with no existential threats. Lumuf believed in it wholeheartedly, and that all of them, even Stella, are wartime leaders. Of all the races on the three core worlds, the lizard folks, tree folks and elves have a very high level of support of the central government. Dwarves and humans were generally split between centrists or order believers, the noble royal groups and the guildsmen. Eon once remarked how ironic that the human groups could be summed up to the stereotypical trio of the priests, the nobles, and the merchants. Do you think the Delvagard dwarves will fold obediently, or will it be violent? Lumuf asked. Generally, I expect it to be violent. Kappa countered. The craft kings of Delvagard won't give up their supremacy so easily. Should we just kidnap them and spare the world of Delvagard from an unnecessary war? Lumuf proposed. Kappa stared back at the priest. He was unable to answer. Lumuf could feel the lizard warrior weighing the odds. A war would have tremendous casualties, and in most cases, unnecessary. A kidnapping in the background by a sneaky, hidden group like them would truly enable them to get around and avoid such conflicts, especially if a transfer of power could happen peacefully, or if these craft kings realize where they stand along the true scales of power. The lizard warrior sighed. I admit kidnapping the leaders and forcing them to bend the knee may be the wiser choice, but I cannot help but feel extremely uncomfortable with it. Maybe it was his class. A warrior class did not sit well with such clandestine methods. Their ethos is excellence through combat. But a priest is a type of subversive class. The natural state of the priest class is to change minds without violence. To convert others. The avatar patted the lizardman's shoulder. It's hard to make such choices, isn't it? Lumuf pointed to the world around them, and then, the portal world opened before them. There was nothing else to do on this world, other than to destroy the Demon King. With that knowledge, it was time to move on. Time to go. The fourth world. The Drake world. Capra Turban, Rune, Johann and Izar arrived in a world and felt the similar presence of demons in the air. The environment around them was filled with rocky spires and deep valleys, and the energy levels in the air seemed to match the shape of the terrain. At the bottom of the valleys were usually fields of dark rocks filled with bugs that survived off the things that fell down or raging rivers. It was a land meant for flying creatures, and it just so happened that the demons responded with flying demons of their own. They were the type of flying demons also found on Ulara. Well, we're bumping into more of these buggers. Well, fuck. I dislike flyers. Izar cursed as he immediately sensed the presence of demons in the air. Without Stella around, they have to rely on their movement abilities, but the mountainous terrain was not meant for sprinting. They would be hopping from spire to spire, since their levitation and flight artifacts would not last that long. The spires were everywhere, as if the earth itself protruded out of the ground like thorns, covered in small vegetation and bushes. Demon King. Rune frowned, and they spotted the Demon King quite a distance away. Let's get some distance between us. The Demon King of Turban was a gigantic flying dragon with two large heads, both blasting the terrain with its energy attacks. The three quickly fled the confrontation with the Demon King. It wasn't time yet, not with their lack of knowledge. As they explored the rest of the mountainous world, the three eventually discovered the natives of the world. The natives were a type of goat people that rode drakes of their own. These goat people lived along the cliffs and made homes in caves and crevices along the cliff walls. Their society was similar to villages and towns, stuck in the standardized medieval era. Capra. The goat people, and they rode the domesticated drakes. Drakes, or the domesticated variants, were friendly smaller drakes that have grown used to the goat people's lives. The more worlds we see, the more I wonder why everyone's weapons and development seem to be stuck in this particular era. Johann said as he rode his own flying dragon. His flying dragon was hugely interesting to the Capra. The first sight of Johann, they immediately bowed to him as if he was the next incarnation of their hero. The heroes of the Capra were legendary drake riders, and the old gods granted the heroes an ability to supercharge their partner drakes, that even allowed those flying drakes to transform into larger dragons, and also strangely, into humanoid forms. For male heroes, apparently the drakes would take on a female form, while the opposite was true. Rune thought the gods meddling with the sexes of their partner dragons to be rather disgusting, and even wondered if this was a form of honey trap or honeypot. The heroes of the Capra world could also take on human forms, on top of their Capran forms. They landed on what looked to be one of the larger populated cliffs, and immediately noticed the huge magical protections covering the cliff. There was also a massive illusionary magical formation that hid the cliffs from the demons, powered by hero items. So there were no heroes in the last 30 years. Johann, Izar and Rune stood as they were welcomed to the Capran Cliff Lord's home. It was a fairly small place, but the lush decorations of the room made it feel much bigger. No, the Capran Cliff Lord answered. Our god and benefactor, Hawa, has not responded to our prayers since 2 decades ago. But we cling faithfully, and continue to pour our prayers into these ancient items left behind by the heroes that came since time immemorial. Rune heard the updates from Lumuf and Edna. This was a common occurrence for the peripheral worlds. They are peripheral worlds for a reason, and the distance from their protector gods meant they didn't get much protection. At this distance, it must cost too much to inform the Caprans of their doomed fate. The flying demon drakes of Capran, the same type as those on Eulera, found Capran to be incredibly suitable and made those same cliffs into the demon nests. The magical energies of Capran seemed to be correlated to the height of the cliffs, the tallest mountains seemed to have stronger ley lines, and so the demons were naturally drawn to them. In the same manner, the old Caprans also found these tall mountains to be places where they could grow and breed strong drakes. The Caprans thus fought against the demons for control of their strongest cliffs, though that war was mostly lost over the last 3 decades. Why didn't the Demon King dig underneath the earth after these 30 years? Johann asked. The Caprans didn't know the Demon King did that, so they had no answer. But the 3 domain holders glanced at each other and thought about it. Maybe it wasn't ready, Rune wondered. Or is it searching for something? Or it needs more hero souls. Izar countered. You know, like what's written and recorded during the Rotterdlands incident. The Demon King killed the heroes, collected the hero souls, and used it to poison the earth. Rune and Johann glanced at each other. So you're saying the Demon King has not killed enough heroes to start digging? Maybe, if the core's resistance is strong enough. Izar proposed. There seems to be some kind of resistance from the core, maybe not super strong, but enough that a Demon King won't attempt to dig to the core until it possesses sufficient kills. I want to say it doesn't make sense, but at the same time, maybe there is some variability in the Demon King's range of abilities. Johann frowned. If that's true, that is a good sign, and may explain why the demons sometimes seem to just wait it out. If it's true, it does feel a bit too good to be true. Izar countered. There is probably a limited number of abilities the demons could cram into the normal-sized Demon Kings. Think about it. These Demon Kings are immensely powerful, and from what we know of the powers of creatures, there has to be a trade-off somewhere. A combat-focused Demon King or a corruption-focused Demon King may not be as well equipped as a Demon King designed to take over a core. It would be a sensible trade-off to make, too. Johann went along with Izar's thought process. If Demon Kings could capture hero souls and use their own energies to power the planetary corruption, it explains why both Adrian and Kelly were not killed but rather captured when we found them back on Mountainworld. Sorry, may I know what you 3 are talking about? The Capran Cliff Lord interjected. Our apologies, we were merely lost in thought. Izar politely apologized. We mean no offense. The Capran Cliff Lord didn't dare to be offended. Johann's beautiful dragon was a powerful beast that signified the rider's immense position. Such a unique beast could only have an equally powerful master. So, he was polite in response. It is nothing. It must be important if it merits the great master of the beast to think about it so seriously. The 3 domain holders accepted the hospitality offered by the Caprans, though they found their choice of food mostly unappealing. The Caprans seemed to pride themselves on all different sorts of cultivated grasses, weeds, and plants as delicacies. They did not eat meat at all. They were pure vegetarians, and Capran cooking was mainly through seasoning the various types of grasses, weeds and plants with sauces derived from fruits. It was odd, but they ate a little anyway, if only not to insult their hosts. But they did find something amusing. Their drakes were fed on special types of fruit. Eon would love this, Rune said as he picked up the strange fruits. They were meaty fruits. They had a tough, stringy texture that looked, felt and tasted like meat. It was as if nature created its own natural plant-based meat. We should ask for one for the biolab. Johann's dragon tried one, and seemed to enjoy the taste. He was given seconds. And thirds. The place that you come front, there is no drakefruit tree. The Caprans were very amused, because the drake fruit's sole purpose was to feed the drakes. There were sub-variants to the drake fruits, such as those infused with more magic so that the drakes gained additional magical properties, or those that gave the drakes extra armor, stronger claws and so on. In the good old days, the Cliffs drake breeders competed on training the best drakes, with the best combination of magical properties. It would please us if you could give us a small sapling of these drake fruits. Johann asked, and given his status as a dragon rider, his request was as good as a command. They gave Johann 3 saplings, each a different subvariant. They would be sent back to Treehome where they would be properly studied. Johann wanted to ask for some drake eggs, too, but he knew his own dragon seemed fairly possessive and like a jealous pet, would show some attitude. With nothing else to do in this cliff town, the trio went on their way. The trio soon visited a few more cliff towns, and rescued a few of them from champion-class attacks. The Demon King was just roaming about, as if the presence of the natives were nothing. It was puzzling behavior. Why did it not eradicate the natives? Was it to farm more hero souls? If so, it would be risky to deploy heroes on worlds where the Demon King wanted to find heroes. Landis. Lausanne watched as the rest of the 8th demonic nest was destroyed by the army of beetles. They've launched attacks relentlessly, and the mages worked tirelessly to send them from battlefield to battlefield. Portals were extremely powerful. They invalidated traditional limitations of space and expanded the operating range. For warriors like the Valthorns and their augmented bodies, they could fight as if their stamina was almost limitless. 6 more nests and all that's left as the Demon King. There were still smaller pockets of demonic nests, but with the major nests removed, the frequency of the demonic raids on the surviving cities reduced tremendously. Yet, the Demon King's behavior on Landis was strange. The Demon King ignored the cursed hero. Lausanne wondered why. Perhaps it either concluded that the elven hero was not a threat, and so decided to bury underground. But the data contradicted how certain Demon Kings on other worlds seemed to wait forever before starting its dig. But their presence brought a huge sense of relief to the 5 elven races of Landis. Almost all of them were sent to Treehome to meet with Eon, and when they returned they found a world not at war. Mostly. It took another 3 months, but Lausanne and the rest of them finally crushed all the major demonic nests, and all that was left was the Demon King. The hero still needed time to prepare, but for the rest of Landis, an era of peace had finally come. The magical interference vanished, and with it, the ancient magical communication networks between the various elven cities could be restored. The surviving elven cities began to reconnect with other nearby settlements. But fear still permeated the elves' lives. Many grew up being told not to venture too far. It would take some time for this foul memory to fade, but Lausanne felt joy. It made her happy to see the elves relaxing. A fuzzy feeling when the injured elves didn't have to rush back to the front line, and were allowed to heal. She came to help the peripheral worlds heal, and was eager to move to the next one. Well, where to? The 5th. 289. Greenfields v. Magisar, the 5th peripheral world. Meteria Hudrot, Gorefort Tower Mage. Meteria Hudrot watched as the magical shields were battered by the attacks from the demons. The fists and arms of the rock demons were strong, but she was a level 42 stone mage, and her shields would hold. This generation of demons had been a good matchup for her, and she gained many levels in the numerous skirmishes since then. Meteria. Duck. Meteria pulled back. Her movement was propelled by manipulating the stones embedded within her robe, and a fireball barely grazed her hair and slammed into what appeared to be a rock golem. But at that moment, she thought she saw a man, with short white hair and wearing some kind of greenish robe. The fireball exploded, and Meteria panicked. Wait, I saw someone. Saw what? The rock demons came for them, but then, there was not a trace of the man that she saw. Was she hallucinating? Pay attention. Meteria's captain screamed as another fireball slammed into the rock demons. This destroyed the rock demon entirely. Meteria. Defense. Got it. Got it. Meteria shook her head briefly and her stone shields reappeared. She once again repositioned herself using the stones within her robe. Her stone levitation allowed her to drag her entire body along as she moved to help her teammates. A few more fireballs, and a few stone bullets, and slowly, Meteria and her 10 teammates brought down the small squadron of rock demons. Good job, the captain said, relieved that none of this team died. Meteria looked back at the battlefield, and she swore that she saw that old man. She walked into the location where she thought the man was, but found nothing. There was absolutely no trace of the man, as if he was never there. Something on your mind, Meteria? The captain asked. I thought I saw a man during the battle. But he vanished just as quickly. The captain walked closer to her, and then grabbed her hand. That sounds like mana exhaustion. But no sign of mana exhaustion. Was I the only one that saw the man? Meteria glanced around. No one else did. The only reason she saw it was exactly in front of her, but he vanished just as quickly. Where did he come from? No one answered her. The captain frowned. Meteria, report back to the infirmary and have yourself subjected to tests by the life mage. She wanted to protest, but then she knew how this all looked like. Yes, sir. Lumoof. Lumoof landed on the fifth world and immediately had a fireball slam into his shield. It wasn't intentional, because the fireball hit the edges of the shield. There were demons everywhere, and there were strange mages fighting against them. The demons around Lumoof were gigantic rocky creatures made of a kind of sandstone rock. The demonic golems of brimstone and fire attempted to punch something in Lumoof's direction, but he vanished before they got him. Stella, can you avoid live battlefields when opening portals? Lumoof complained through their linked messaging system once he got out of his short-distance teleportation and landed a good distance away in what seemed to be a large valley filled with demons, and a group of mages defending against them. The defenders were humans, but they all seemed pale. Lumoof briefly wondered if they were malnourished, but his senses soon realized this was their natural state. The humans, for once, were not exactly helpless. They all seemed like a decently experienced group of combatants and they hurled magic freely. Magical fireballs and blasts of energy slammed into the demonic golems, and the explosions ripped the golem demons apart. The group of skinny humans huddled together. Lumoof watched as they shredded the last of the golem demons, and then checked their surroundings for more enemies. Lumoof's presence was shrouded in enough protective items and illusions that he was fairly certain they didn't see him. Kaffa popped out of the portal a few minutes later. Sorry I am late, did I miss something? Thankfully, he was also protected by his protections that most likely would not have noticed him. Lumoof and Kaffa continued to follow the group of mages back that eventually led to a steep mountain. At the peak of that mountain was a magical structure that floated above the skies, a magical creation. The mountain wasn't totally bare. It was filled with some small trees and vegetation, though Lumoof immediately noticed the encroaching presence of demonic hybrids in small patches all over the place. He would have to investigate that later, and get a better read on the world's state. But for now, he directed his attention towards the floating structure, a city suspended midair by magic. That is quite impressive, Lumoof said. He activated his spiritual sight and immediately noticed the presence of magical energies from the ground below. There was a faint taste of the hero's presence in the magical structures beneath the floating castle, and multiple magical protections. Seems like they used ley lines to power a levitation formation, and kept their city protected from the demons. Ley lines that were fading. The group of magicians regrouped somewhere near the bottom of the castle, and then Lumoof heard them curse. What's taking them so long to activate the teleportation formation? One of the humans that appeared to be the leader of the group began to talk. One of the other mages then teased. Probably one of the mages sleeping on the job. Really? I'll give that guy a good sounding once I get back. Lumoof looked at Kaffa, and then back at the flying castle. Think we can get in? Kaffa shrugged, but knew it was a rhetorical question. The real question wasn't whether they could, but which method would serve their interest best. So, Kaffa responded with a silly question of his own. Do you want to jump in, or do you want me to throw you in? Lumoof laughed, and then pointed. Let's just watch. They are not the only group. Lumoof said as he felt the presence of more people through the plants and trees around them. I sense more people coming here. Kaffa turned around and tried to focus his own senses. That plant sense of yours is overpowered as hell. You can be a tree man if you want. Lumoof smiled. It's surprisingly nice to have Eon right next to me all the time. Kaffa shook his head in horror. I'll take that back. Well, let's see what these guys are up to. There were 6 other small groups, all mages just like the first group. They felt like mages, because of how their mana poured out of their spirit, and the spiritual lines that facilitated magic use were most pronounced. A common feature when mana use was high, and something Lumoof seen often in their own mages and wizards. Still waiting for the teleport. The other groups arrived and quickly asked. They were all slender-looking mages, and all wore some kind uniform, made of knitted leather and wool. Yeah, it's taking a damn while. Are the charge crystals malfunctioning again? One of the other mages from the third party asked. How'd I know? But that would explain why we're stuck here. Glad to see you guys all in one piece. The mage leader from the very first party smiled. Just usual rock demons, wed live. A fourth party returned, and Lumuf noticed this party carrying far more things. He continued to observe their interactions. What happened? Our usual forage run is interrupted by rock demons, and one of my guys is an idiot. The fourth party leader explained. There was a corpse. He's dead, but we hauled his body back for his family. The rest sighed. Young ones should know better than to charge into a party of demons. Lumuf watched and he felt it. The thread of magic in the air was something he could sense innately, and so, he activated his invisibility, and walked closer to the group. The teleportation formation activated, and the group all vanished, pulled into the floating fortress above the mountain. Meteria, you're fine. Eyes appear normal, and there's no unusual mana presence along your mind or your spirit. The healer said. Healer. Life mage. The distinction hardly existed in the Gorfort Tower. The rest of her team was already in the barracks dropping off their harvest for the day. I am. Meteria muttered, but a second later she realized how ridiculous it all sounded. Of course I am fine. The healer and life mage promptly discharged her, and Meteria decided it was time to go visit her own master. Her master's tower wasn't far from the place, so she stepped out of the infirmary and into the streets of Gorfort Tower's fourth floor. She glanced around, her feet sensed the vibrations of the stone used around Gorfort Tower, and noticed. Am I being followed? It can't be. She looked again and there's nothing there. Her stone sense was a strange skill, but it saved her life a few times. But why? Who would follow her? She walked anyway and went into her master's research tower. It was a small, cramped space. Space was very expensive in all the safe havens of Magisar. Did you manage to find what I asked? An older voice said once Meteria stepped into the third floor of the tiny tower. It belonged to a small, petite woman with not much muscles. Her appearance was tired, wrinkles were all over her body. Yes, I did. Meteria checked her pouch and took out a piece of rock with stripes. The vein remains untouched for now. The older woman frowned as she also picked up the same rock, and then she began to examine it with a strange copper-colored contraption. This is no good. No good. It looks fine to me. Meteria didn't want to believe it. Stupid disciple. Come closer. Look at the stripes. It's starting to show dark reddish spots. Meteria's face was one of horror once she too noticed the presence of the tiny spots in the stripes, made visible through the copper contraption. The demon's magic is seeping into our usual mineral veins. The tower masters must. They know. Meteria was about to protest but then she stopped. What? They know. They know. Disciple. They are just trying to figure out how bad it is and what can be done. They are not fools, despite all the arrogance they portray around the rest of you. The younger mage frowned. How much time do we have? That's why I sent you. The older woman pulled down a paper map suspended off a ceiling. The map was one of the wider surroundings, with the tower in the center. Around the tower were marked locations, each with a date. She snapped a finger and a wooden 5-stepped ladder came over, and she climbed up to the map. She began to write dates, and then, with a wooden abacus, began to calculate. It was a relatively simple mathematical extrapolation based on the distance and dates of corruption based on the last corrupted vein and the newest corruption vein, and the extrapolated to their current location. Think we have somewhere around 17 to 25 years before the ley lines underneath Gorfort experience the demonic taint. That's not a lot of time. Meteria countered. Not much, but not little either. The old woman sat down, and then took out another copper bowl. She placed the rock into the copper bowl and then set it down. Well, let's go see Ol Junker and see whether he's got a different data set. Meteria stared at the old woman. He's also looking into this. Of course he is. You think he spends his time flirting with his two beautiful disciples? No. He works them like hell. Meteria chuckled lightly. Do you need me to go with you, master? Come. Magister Junker would spill a lot more secrets if you were around. He's not interested in old hags like me anymore. The younger disciple watched as her master climbed down the stairs. It still made her marvel every time she saw her move about as if she was still a spry young woman. The two of them moved down, but then Meteria paused and looked back. She thought she saw one of the books on the floor move. The vibrations on the rock and wooden floor seemed strange, as if there was someone else in the room with them. Invisibility was impossible. Meteria was not aware of such magic. She looked around, tried to feel for the presence of magic, but the entire place was filled with so many little magical trinkets that it was hard to be sure. She turned back, and followed her master out of the door. The alleys and streets of Gorfort were all tiny. Space was expensive in a safe haven like Gorfort, and every inch mattered. It was someone's home. An extra few bits of space could fit a shelf, or a cabinet, or even a tiny bed for their skinny bodies. They were not fat. Not at all. Lumoof and Kaffa looked around and immediately felt it was hard to move about. The entire place was so tiny that they were bound to bump into things. The humans of this world were skinny, thin. Not a single one of them had bulky muscles, and instead, they all seemed more attuned to magic. The entire structure was a series of floors, built on top of one another. Each layer was largely self-sufficient, and movement between the layers were regulated by the guards and mages that controlled the tower. It wasn't hard for Lumoof to notice that those located in the middle were all the unwanted, lower-class people, while those who had some skills and talents were located along the sides of the floating castle, where there's sunlight and some fresh air. They followed the two mages through the small streets, trying their best to dodge where they could, and eventually, they passed through what was an actual, really crowded market. There were not actually that many people. They passed through the tiny stalls, packed with all the goods they tried to sell. Kaffa looked at the stalls. It was separated into segments, and labeled with signs. Equipment, tools, and food. They use a lot of wood, gems and copper for tools. Kaffa spoke telepathically as they observed the crowd. The two mages were still walking up ahead. Did they not have minds? Lumoof wondered as they then passed the tools and equipment section. It was so cramped that it was just a few steps away, and they reached the food section. There were only 3 stalls, one with vegetables, another with baked breads, and another with fruits. There's nothing for me to eat here, Kaffa said as a joke. Seems like a good place for the non-meat eaters though. Lumoof felt like a candle lit up in his mind. Is their skinny build due to a lack of meat? Kaffa shrugged. Sounds like it's worth exploring. Let's follow these two. They seem to be talking about important stuff. Meteria. O.L. Junker. Her master shouted as she pushed the wooden door open and stepped into a small workshop on one of the corners of Gorfort Tower's many floors. The old man inside was tinkering with some contraption while his 2 female assistants were also trying to replicate his contraption. Her voice shocked all 3 of them, and the old man immediately looked up. What brings the grumpy old Karifa to my workshop? Can't you see I am trying to teach these 2 girls how to tune a magical seeker's compass? That's a stupid thing to learn in this time and age. I got my latest data on the taint. I want to compare notes. Her master, Karifa Gunhurt shouted. Meteria wasn't sure when her master wrote the scroll in her hands, but somehow she did. First, no magic is stupid. Junker Quartz, one of the leading bronze images, immediately glared at Karifa hatefully. Second, if you are here to depress me, I'll kick you out. It's depressing all right, Karifa said. Do you want to know or not? Or should I take it to the older farts upstairs? Fine. Disciples. Let's head upstairs and see what this OL woman has for us. The 2 girls bowed. Above the workshop was a relatively airy room, with a view of the skies. The corner units of the Gorfort Tower were highly prized, and it was only with Junker Quart's stellar record as a master bronze image that he won the right to use them. On one set of walls were 3 empty boards. Karifa tapped her scroll and the scroll's contents were transferred to one of the magical boards. Junker stared at it, and looked at his 2 disciples. Bring our set of reports. One of the girls nodded, ran down and back up again in a minute and he tapped the scroll. Karifa frowned. Looks like yours is more optimistic. Our samples were collected. One of the girls ran to the board and pointed. There. We don't know which of the taint would reach us first. Our usual copper mines would be under threat and farms would be under threat. The tower masters should be calling for a culling of the demonic vegetation. Karifa said. Junker shook his head. I don't think that would work. 9-4 tried that with their surroundings, and their ley lines were still corrupted. Karifa frowned. Is that supposed to be a secret? Yes. But I am telling you anyway. Are you going to report me? No. So it won't. What's our solution? Junker looked at the map, took a deep breath, and then said. Energy filtration. We need to purify the demonic taint so that we can continue to use the energy. Our entire existence depends on it. This made both Meteria and Karifa glare at the old man suspiciously. Use of demonic mana from harvested demonic trees has caused mutations. Do you have a workaround? No. Lumoof and Kaffa listened in the room, and the rest of the conversation shifted to politics. At that point, the 2 retreated to a quiet area, and looked at each other. Our goal is to fully survey all 15 worlds before we decide how to and what to deploy. Kaffa repeated. But I cannot help but feel we should help all of them. All of these worlds are in trouble in one way or form. The very reason Hawa asked for assistance was simply because these worlds were in trouble. 15 worlds. Even if one of us is in each of these peripheral worlds, and Eon leaves a clone on the rest, that still leaves us 4 short. Lumuf said. And Eon will not risk all the clones. We have node trees. Or if we select one of the options you are given. Kappa said. That should help. But look beyond their immediate troubles, and think beyond it. Eon's goal is to bring these worlds into our wider campaign. Which of these worlds will contribute the most to our war effort? Which of these worlds will be strategically useful, and contribute to our war? Kappa looked away and sighed. I wish we could just help them all. We will help them all. But there is a choice for us to make, beyond the immediate assistance. A question of permanence. A question of adding strength to our whole. Which of these worlds is worth an investment? Which of these worlds can be made into a core world? Landis has it easy. They have a node. A node doesn't mean we will invest our resources there. The Valthorns' ability to invest on a planetary scale is limited. Even now we can only fully occupy one world at a time. Just the mere act of controlling the human kingdoms on 3 worlds took a significant amount of Valthorn personnel. Rebuilding Tropics World still continued to require a significant amount of imported resources. The choice we make adds to our overall resources. Lumuf said, as he recalled how Eon once described the problem as an optimization issue. Clones were limited, but clones bestowed benefits on their host worlds. The various auras of Eon enhanced their citizens' health, development, productivity, and even made them level up faster. Each of these worlds would benefit from Eon's aura, but which one would benefit the most? Lumuf looked back at the Gorfort Tower. They've visited 5 worlds. There were 10 more to go. 290. Greenfield 7. 290. 6th world. The Great Steppes. Edna and Stella landed together on a field. Vast, and the fields of green and gold seemed to go on forever, over the rolling hills to the horizon. This is quite the view. Stella smiled, and stretched. It reminded her of the farmlands back home, or the great open plains where horses and wild bulls used to roam. She took in the air. It was windy. The grass was colorful, and on closer observation, it is as if someone made a field of grass and added a palette of colors just for variety. There were spots of red, pink, and even purple grasses. I wouldn't say I dislike this. They were likely slightly magical, but at this point, all the Void Holder wanted to do was take the view in and appreciate a rare moment of peace. The wind blew, and the blades of grass rustled. It was pleasant. Edna tapped the woman on her shoulder. A nice welcome, and I believe this world has potential to be a tourist spot someday. Stella shook her head. She probably imagined beetle buses of tourists, shuffled from viewing point to viewing point. The tourists would probably ruin it. Edna laughed. Stella once warned extensively on the problems of overtourism, though none of her fears actually played out in the central continent. For now, tourism remained largely the realm of the wealthy, and even though middle-income folks could afford to travel regionally, it was still not in large enough numbers that places experienced overtourism. It helped Eon's natural energies meant damage to nature was fairly easy to mend. It didn't take hundreds of years to restore a damaged forest. Well, let's look for the natives, and find out what kind of demons plague this world. They found a group of traveling centaurs a relatively large distance away. Greetings. Both Edna and Stella arrived and the centaurs immediately kneeled once they arrived in front of them. Oh, the Holy Ones blessed us. The 2-legged heroes have arrived. Stella from a few decades ago would have blushed, but she was now quite comfortable in her position of authority that she didn't flinch. Up close, they noticed the sheen of natural armor around the centaur's chest, as if they were some blend of a suit of armor and a horse, rather than the usual centaur form of a man and a horse. Edna and Stella looked at each other and regretted their approach. Stella pinged Edna through magic. Did we just fuck it up? I think we did. We should know better. Remind me to use invisibility and spy on the natives before we even attempt to talk to them. I suppose we should exploit this opportunity to learn what we can. After all, if they think we are heroes, we should be able to get information. Edna nodded at the centaurs. Hello. Can you tell us about this world? The centaurs rose from their awkward kneeling position. Centaurs were not really designed for kneeling, their 4 legs more suited for running. Certainly, blessed ones. We will guide you to the nearest encampment. The world was known as the Great Steppes, and as a land filled with mostly rolling hills and vast grasslands. The Great Steppes didn't have much vegetation beyond bushes and grasses, and large trees were almost altogether non-existent. Still, Great Steppes was mainly populated by 2 types of centaurs, that are so different that they might as well be entirely different races. One was the armored centaurs, and they are referred to as the armators. These were centaurs with naturally built armor and helmets. Their bodies somehow created hard plates over their chest, arms, shoulders, and body. The other centaur race are the Lancias. They are centaurs, but with natural weapons and retractable spears, lances and spikes throughout their body. Despite an ancient tradition where both of the two centaur races lived apart, the two centaurian races were generally cordial with each other, and frequently cooperated with each other for special occasions. The armators worshipped Hawa, while the Lancias worshipped a god called Zulfa. The demons were the usual fire-breathing demons wielding a flaming weapon of some kind, and their elites were a variant of the demon knights. The demon king were slain about 11 years ago, and the previous hero died with it. The new demon king just arrived not long ago, and seemed to be waiting for the hero's arrival. It was a world that seemed relatively stable now. In the vast grasslands and shrublands of the Great Steppes, there were now areas that were regularly known as the Demonic Highlands. For Edna and Stella, the contact went fairly standard. The two Centaurian subspecies waited for the Blessed Ones, and the Blessed Ones would slay the Demon King. With enough data collected, it was time to get moving. Eon, Rune, Johann and Izar returned home briefly, and then they were off again to visit the seventh world. In the meantime, I was given their collected samples from the world of Capra. Drake fruit. The plants went into my biolabs, and I immediately unlocked the ability to replicate the drake fruits at scale. I noticed that they were also surprisingly compatible with my existing class seeds and skill seeds, and in short, it would be possible to fuse the drake fruit with my skill seeds and class seeds, to create skill fruits for drakes. This was a fascinating thing, and I didn't know why it never occurred to me to create powerful skills for various pets and mounts. I watched, and from my central vantage point, Landis had mostly stabilized. Landis was the first world where I truly tested what were the limits of the node tree. My node tree didn't have my aura, and although I could still spawn subsidiary trees through my node trees, trees that were linked through my node trees did not share my higher tier abilities. So, node trees had some constraints. 1. I couldn't use my giant attendant trees through them. Everything that was connected through the node tree was restricted. I could see through them, but only at a basic level, not my full breadth of spiritual sight. Even my listening and observational abilities were severely limited. The mana output and extraction at each of these worlds were also a fraction of my tree. Node trees also didn't share any of my auras, and the subsidiary trees of Landis were the basic version. This meant the number of beetles they could host per subsidiary tree was 3 beetles per subsidiary tree, and the beetles were inferior to those spawned by subsidiary trees linked through my clones or main body. Still, the teleportation ability of the node tree meant it was possible to send my titans like Hytrerion to Landis. Stella, while traveling through Landis and then later to the Sarpi, began hammering on the need to use my titans, especially given my new expanded limits. I could deploy up to 10 additional titans, and each of these titans would be a strong supporting force in any of these peripheral worlds, or even Delvagard. Or I could use them to augment my resource restrictions back home. In many ways, my high-level 100s were a limited resource. Especially when distributed over the planned 15 worlds. So, they needed a force multiplier, and titans should be that sort of force multiplier. Let's see what sort of titan choices I have now. With my clone's new ability to support titans, I could now support up to 15 titans, and a total of 13 additional. I currently have 2 active titans in service. Hytrerion and Patrique's presence in 3 worlds was likely to be unnecessary soon, and I would like to redeploy him to one of the other worlds soon. So as my domain holders gathered data on the peripheral worlds, I began to consider the tools I had at our disposal to enhance my Valthorns' performance in these peripheral worlds. Ever since my Greater Titans upgrade, my choices changed. They started with a base power level of about level 125, a decent increase from their prior level 70 to 90 power levels. The Great Storm Bird, a greater storm titan that takes the form of a flying thunderbird, and has the ability to summon up to 3,000 flying eagles of relatively strong combat power. Has shared vision and senses, and many lesser abilities. Carapace Demonhunter Worm, a greater variant of the Depth Worm, with immense earth abilities and very high resistance to demonic damage. Has the ability to summon 2,000 worms with similar resistances and abilities. Can significantly improve ground fertility and plant yields, and also undo demonic corruption for Earth. The Greater Leveling Dungeon with higher levels and more rewards. Will cause its surroundings to be tainted by pollution and magical miasma, and the spawn rate of high-level monsters outside of the dungeon's vicinity will be significantly increased. Certain blessings and auras. will be nullified in the greater leveling dungeon's presence, but experience gain will be significantly increased. Skills gained below level 149 will likely be of a stronger variant. Fusion with any court of the TreeTree, the Tree Ant King. Significantly improve the host's abilities and endurance. Host will no longer age, and will be immune to non-divine sickness and poisons. Host will also now enjoy domain level mental protections, and will be able to resist divine laws. Also grants the ability to summon and control up to 300 tree ants. Gantrithor Beetle Carrier, a flying beetle commander transformed into a greater titan. Each Gantrithor functions as a mobile command center for beetles, allowing all beetles to operate significantly further from an existing subsidiary tree. Each Gantrithor also carries within its spatial body an army of 8,000 greater beetles. Each greater beetle is around level 30 to 35, and possesses flight abilities. Each Gantrithor can also self-destruct to deal explosive damage. The Void Treant. Fusion with a familiar granted to a void-attuned treefolk, a treant meant to thrive in the void layers. Resistant to void turbulence and can move about. Can use void mana, use void magic and also open void portals. Fusion with Trichikomas, the gigantic spider tree, a giant walking laboratory and hospital with the ability to deploy smaller about 1,000 Trichikomas, treants and beetles. Provides a strong mobile blessing aura and healing presence to restore friendly parties. Living beings in its presence will not grow hungry or thirsty. Fusion with Hamadryad body, only one available, the primordial elemental, a significantly powerful dryad mage specializing in elemental spells of around level 140. Can regenerate even after destruction, and is able to summon 500 fire, water or earth elementals. Fusion with underground living crystal labs, the primordial foundry, a tree that attached itself to a ley line and converts magical energy into crystals or metals. Produces a large quantity of crystals or metals based on a system-defined ratio. That's a fairly good selection. Lumuf commented while he was elsewhere. A world away, but we were always together. That was life as an avatar. But I think what you need is utility in these peripheral worlds. The ability to provide low-level suppressing force while the Valthorns deal with any stronger threats. We could pick one of each and send them, Edna commented, also in a different world. But I suppose there is a matching problem, since not all titans are designed for each of the worlds. But I thought about the titans as a second best choice, for worlds without my clone. I have 3 clones, one on cooldown after I used one on Hawa's world of Satria, but ultimately I was only prepared to deploy 2 clones. I'd like to keep 1, or perhaps 2 in reserve, if we do stumble on more worlds. The peripheral worlds are not the only worlds. Beyond these 15 worlds there will be many more worlds that need our help, and so, to artificially limit my choices to these 15 worlds because of Hawa's request would be silly. I did not make a choice. Not yet. I thought it'd be fairer to optimize once the domain holders came back with the detailed reports. There were still a few more worlds to go. The 5th world, Magisar. 18 surviving magical academies, all conveniently located in levitating cities. Lumuf said as he surveyed the documents stolen from one of the mages. Unlike the mages of Magisar who did not stray far from their homes, Lumuf and Kapha found the world no threat at all, and so they camped in the wilderness, in a cocoon of roots. Despite the initially impressive veneer of the levitating cities, what they saw did not impress them. The levitating cities of Magisar were pretty much something copied out of a despotic magical universe, with the Tower Masters ruling as oppressive kings, while the lower classes were all just nothing more than flesh that was thrown away once they were not useful. Because the Tower Masters controlled the levitating cities, everyone else were pretty much at their mercy. There were a few fortresses on land that were made by those who didn't want to endure the Tower Masters' oppression, but these fortresses did not have better living conditions. In fact, because of the lack of generational resources and legacy magical items, these fortresses are often at a subsistence level, and their rulers are also pretty much dictatorial, if for no reason beyond maintaining order. It is hard to be happy and well-behaved when everyone is perpetually underfed and in a terrible living environment. I must say this doesn't seem to be the worst world. Kapha said. They still have functional governments, even if it's teetering on collapse. Really? Lumuf asked. I would have thought this is one of the worst ones. Worse than Landis that is holed up in their artifact cities with much smaller populations. Kapha countered. Or the world of Sarpi where almost 9 out of 10 lava people have died. Or the dead world with no one left. Lumuf looked back at the map. Well, I suppose on a sheer numerical survivor basis this is pretty decent. It is. Kappa repeated. I would rank this in a similar capacity to the world of Capra Turban. Would you save them? Yes. That doesn't need to be asked. Kappa said. It is our duty. Lumuf chuckled at the term duty. Some of them viewed helping these worlds as a duty of those with strength. As wardens, we were here to reset the damage caused by an extraordinary force. Something outside of the normal nature of these worlds. Should a warden also engage in repopulation? Ecosystem restoration? Is there a line between restoration and meddling with natural selection? It was a thought I entertained briefly. It's a dangerous loop to go down, and I decided to prioritize life. Save lives, and deal with balancing issues later. It was a good thing to do, politically. It enhanced our reputation, it gave reason and purpose to maintain a large Valthorn army and infrastructure, and the Valthorns often truly believed in it. Only Lumuf felt my own inner conflict, with the duty of safeguarding the world's natural state, and whether we would go too far, and believe in ourselves as saviors. A savior complex would be troublesome, and that made me uncomfortable. Then, Lumuf looked at Kappa. From what you've seen of the mage societies, would you want to bring them into the fold? That was a tough one. I didn't have the answer for it either. A magically proficient species would be a great help to offset our magical needs, but we would have to significantly usurp the ruling mages in order to gain access to the talent we need. I would rank them the best of the worlds we've seen so far, in terms of potential contribution to the coming days. Kappa said. Lumuf smiled. Fair. But let's keep it aside, because it's time to go. We have more worlds to see. Let's leave the demons for now, we'll leave it to the Valthorns to come in and sweep. The demon king of Magisar appeared to be some kind of demonic golem, and even now, more demons appeared through the demonic rifts overhead. One of the key problems faced by Magisar was the demonic corruption. The demon champions of this world were similar to the corrupting demons of Sabnok. They were gigantic demonic walkers that planted themselves near sources of magic such as ley lines, and then used that demonic energy to spawn more demonic golems. In the process of doing so, they corrupt their environment and also cause the demons' energies to spread into the world around them. This created the demonic hybrids that we saw across the terrain, and incredibly, the demonic hybrids themselves carried demonic spores that spread even more demonic corruption. What we learned of the demons' methods did not really surprise it. It was just some variation of existing demon tactics, and should be fairly easy to deal with. We later deployed a small batch of Valthorns on Magisar, mainly to support the information gathering once Lumuf and Kappa ensured that there was minimal divine level meddling, and my Valthorns began scouring the terrain looking for refugees and those not living in the giant towers. There were more than we expected. We rescued a few groups of small refugees fleeing their land-based encampments, and it explained most of their unusual behavior. 1. They did not have iron tools or hard metals in large quantities. Instead, all their people primarily used variants of some kind of copper or tin element, or in the more powerful mages, gold or silver. Iron was truly a rarity, and it reflected in the nature of the humans themselves. They resemble humans in many ways, but their blood is made of a different elemental metal altogether. Unlike our knowledge of humans that had iron in our blood, the humans of Magisar instead had something else that we have not encountered in the rest of the peripheral worlds. A quasi-iron, and it was something I would like to examine in greater detail. It was likely Magisar humans could not interbreed with regular humans due to blood incompatibility. The blood samples and biological samples we collected through aiding some of the refugees suggested that this elemental difference in their blood resulted in Magisarian humans being biased to magic, as their bodies did not bulk and did not gain much muscle. Overall, we did have a relatively high rating for the world of Magisar, but we needed more time to shape the form of our contact. We have not yet decided on how to engage with these magical towers, whether we would take over, or whether we would be a little more diplomatic. Outside of the natural magical talents of the natives, the world itself was of no use, and I wondered whether we could offer a choice to the locals, and then relocate the natives to a safer world, once we verified that their physique could survive on otherworld foods. A massive breeding program could offset our challenges in training wizards and mages. With a high-level understanding of the world of Magisar, it was time to move to the next world. 7th world. Now this is something. Lumuf sat as he watched the winds blow from top to bottom, and there was no horizon. Instead, the horizon curved upwards, as if the world was looped. Another ringworld, but not one of the demons. Mayhaps the inspiration source of the demon's sun rings. Kappa looked in another direction, and then up into the sky to see 2 gigantic rings that rotated around the sun. That meant there were a total of 3 rings, and they were on the outermost ring. There seems to be multiple rings. Lumuf nodded, and noticed this world was physically quite big. I do wonder, where is the core of a ringworld? Core. Kappa laughed and pointed into the skies. The layered rings around the surprisingly small sun seemed strange. Maybe that moon. That's the only thing that resembles a core from this distance. The avatar shrugged as his eyes traced the demonic rifts above them. Strangely enough, this world had two active demonic rift paths. Kappa couldn't see it, but the news made Stella curious, and so both Stella and Edna left the great steps to join them in the layered ringworlds. There were 3 rings surrounding their small sun, and the innermost ring was the smallest and thinnest. The middle ring was a bit wider, while the furthest ring was the widest. Closest to the sun was a strange glowing purple moon that overlooked all of the 3 rings. The 3 rings orbited around the sun like the 3 axes of a gyroscope, each moving in its own direction. The demonic rift paths through the void sea were then each connected to outermost and middle layers. Well, we have evidence 101 that the demons can actually attack with 2 demon kings at the same time. Stella said as she studied the demonic rifts. There's no actual rule against it, merely a convenience from the way the demons arrange their attack pattern. 2 demon kings doesn't mean we have to face both of them together. Edna shrugged. Some operational difficulties, but if the 2 don't stick together, it isn't that different. Agreed, but it does lend credence to Hawa's claim that the demons have measures we don't see yet. Lumuf then looked around. Maybe we should ask Hawa about this world. Make use of that artifact he gave us. First, we should find the natives. Stella countered. So far in the few days they were busy studying the magical energies of the world that they have not located any natives. It was not hard to find them once the 4 started to look. They were hibernating humans living in underground caves, and it seemed the world experienced what was called the regular weeks of darkness. There was no concept of a day-night cycle in this world, because the sun was always overhead in a ringworld. Instead, they had a period when the sun dimmed significantly, for 2 weeks at a stretch. The purple darkness. The domain holders were on the surface when the darkness happened. The sun abruptly transformed and changed color. As if the bright yellow sun itself was turned into a dim, dark blue sun. The light vanished. The sun in the sky was still there, but was difficult to see with regular sight, because now the dominant object was the purple moon. Everything turned purple, and then the monsters appeared. They were no threat. But the monsters were powerful. Level 60 to 80 monsters, seemingly empowered by the purple moon. It was this world's natural defenses, and the domain holders saw these monsters slaying the demonic beasts as well. Only the demon champions could hold. Lumuf realized. Who do they need heroes if the native beasts are so powerful? Let's ask the natives. The native humans were few, but they created entire societies underground. Their underground tunnels were fortifications, layers of walls, and none of them wanted to be outside during the purple darkness. They were very good at constructing defenses, simply because the monsters were all really powerful, and so they concentrated their resources on building multiple layers of walls. The domain holders continued to spy on the natives for a bit, using invisibility to sneak through their defenses and into their underground societies. There, we saw the natives living fairly decent lives. They grew crops under the glow of unique light-emitting metals, and we watched their society operate. There were 2 main activities for their society, the wall builders, and the planters. The wall builders were just the overarching title given to those who constructed their fortifications and structures. They dug new rooms underground. There were a subgroup, called the venturers, that traveled along the surface to find new places to build a home. Each of these labyrinthian homes were called a chamber. This one was called the White Ring Chamber. Each of these chambers could be home to 5,000 to 20,000 people, and throughout the 3 rings, there were at least thousands of these chambers. Each of the rings, in terms of actual surface area, was likely much bigger than the surface area of the 3 worlds or tree home. In some ways, these 3 rings potentially had the highest population potential. If the threat of the purple darkness was nullified, and the demons solved, each of these 3 rings could house 10 billion, maybe even 20 billion for the outer rings due to the sheer size of the surface area. So, after 2 to 3 weeks of observation, we finally made the move to contact the natives. The humans were surprised to see us, but ultimately they were all very welcoming of guests. Because in this world, all humans fought against the demons and the monsters outside. The surface of the ringworlds was a dangerous place at the wrong place and the wrong time, and the odds of surviving in the purple darkness was thoroughly low. So, the world developed a norm to house guests in their outer rooms. For venturers who ventured too far. For harvesters and herbal collectors that lost their way. You come from the world of the heroes. Those summoned by the three-ringed gods will. Lumuf, Kapha, Stella and Edna stood as they approached one of these native fortifications. They only exited their fortifications once the purple darkness came to an end. Still, as a wary kind, they created special holding zones near the entrances of their underground societies. Their fortifications were similar to the lairs of an evil mastermind, and comprised layers and layers of doors, each fortified to keep unwanted people out. I can't help but wonder how this society even developed. Kapha said, as the humans escorted Lumuf and Kapha to their guest zones. How did a society come from nothing to this? Luckily, the natives were more than happy to explain their own origin story. It seemed to be a story that each child learns when they turn 2 or 3 years old. We were created by the three-ringed gods. The human spiritual leader explained. Each of the rings are the bodies of our god, the three-ringed god, and the god fought against the devourer of the sun. The battle ended in a stalemate, with both sides dying. The evil god became the remnant moon, while the three-ringed god became the rings that we live on. Lumuf and Kapha looked at each other and knew their creation myths were probably wrong, but they didn't want to correct them. It would be highly improper to correct their hosts. It was not yet the time. Such things had to be handled gently. We came to this world as refugees, brought over by the three-ringed god from an older world. The three-ringed god's voice sent us into the underground homes, and gave us talents to thrive in this world. The native spiritual leader then demonstrated the ability. The seemingly normal humans then created fists made of steel, as if their flesh had the ability to transform into steel. We've seen it in operation, but still we feigned surprise. Internally, the Valthorns classified these humans as the steel-blooded. They were naturally tougher and more resistant, but even that wasn't enough. We use our gifts to build these steel walls, form our homes out of the body of the three-ringed gods, and manipulate the ring steel into these fortified doors. They keep the demons out. I see. Lumuf answered. Your three-ringed god is wise. Kind. The native human answered. At this point, they were not really native humans, but some of us wanted to call them the ringmen. Are the strongest among you able to defeat the monsters during the purple darkness? Kapha asked. A few of us, yes. The ring leader answered. But there are more beasts out in the purple darkness than we ever could. Only those blessed by the three-ringed god can walk under the purple darkness and face the darkness. The interactions and discussions over the next few weeks with the natives went fairly well. We learned that the locals were not the type to battle the demons or the monsters of the purple darkness. They only engaged and hunted monsters during the months of sun, as they needed their flesh and parts for tools. Under the influence of the purple moon, they avoided contact and focused on hiding in their bunkers. The domain holders learned what they could, but there were no true bombshells. Things that the rest of the Valthorns can gather, in due time. So, Stella's attention turned skywards. They all looked at the thing that floated so close to the sun. A massive celestial object that was the true master of this realm. Let's go to the purple moon. 291. The tainted Greenfield's Eye. 291 Greenfield's 8. The purple moon of the three-ringed world. The 4 domain holders landed on the purple moon, and the sensation was immediate. Core. Lumuf said, but he didn't really need to say it. All the domain holders knew, it was similar to the time when they reached the core of Tropicsworld. There was no doubt, no uncertainty. Just merely stepping on it they felt the core attempt to make a connection. For the rest of them, their domains blocked it. But Lumuf allowed it through, so that I could speak to it. The feeling of a million thoughts seeping through his feet, and somehow the million voices coalesced into 3 distinct voices, yet they speak as one. The mere contact flooded me with visions of the 3 rings, of a world once without the plague of the demons. Of a world when the purple moon did not release bursts of energy to cause the monsters to run amok. Visitors. How strange. The voice spoke through my mind immediately, and by now, I was quite used to the presence of such ancient things. Hello. I am Eon, from another world. We have not had visitors since the long drift apart. There was a long pause, but I said nothing, because I felt its probing senses. Cores, from what I could tell, were not evil. It was looking for things around me, and its energies moved. I can sense the vague remnants of my fellow cores in your being, their power subsumed into yours. I wondered then whether those were my clones. Are you here to claim us? Like the foul constructs? No. I answered through the avatar form. With things like the core, I decided honesty was the best policy. They were in some ways, sentient machines. I come to destroy them, as requested by one of the gods. So you are a claimant either way. A less destructive one. I could feel Lumuf's intention to respond negatively, but again, I've talked to enough cores to understand that their statements tend to be more pointed. If that counts as claiming, then yes. I will establish a presence in your ringworlds, and then use it to mount a counterattack on the demons. I said plainly through our mental link. The domain holders stood on the purple rock, and the entirety of the rock was this realm's planetary core. It just didn't take the form of a planetary core, but instead placed itself out of reach of the demons by existing as a moon. What will you do to our children? The cores created and took care of each of their inhabitants. In that way, each native is a child of their core. Still, I was not sure how to answer them. They will live, prosper, perhaps, but live. I felt a probing sense, as if it tried to understand where and what I had done. It somehow traced my flesh across all the worlds, yet not through me, but as if it were droplets of rain flowing down the leaves and barks of a tree. Yet, protectiveness. This was a protective core. A world that wanted to keep its children alive. Altered forever, but alive. Our voice, if our children believe. I felt a sense of acceptance, that my presence would be tolerable. Acceptable. The core's voice vanished. We were still standing on the core. The core refused to entertain us further, as I felt the will retreat back into the depths of the core. I could force it if I plant a clone here. But would I be better than the demons that way? I think of planet cores, or actually, these realm cores as the center of each world. It is not the sun like our old worlds, but instead, these worlds are as if medieval beliefs where Earth was the center of the universe was true. Well, almost every one, except for this one. I had many questions about the design and creation of this world. We looked back at the three rings. From this vantage point, it was as if the three rings moved around us. We glanced at the sections where the three rings intersected one another. There were 6 intersection points, and at each of these intersection points were beams of light that connected one ring to another, a place referred to as the ladder. It allowed the natives to move from one ring to another, and it was how all 3 rings are connected, even if one didn't have magic. I suppose we should just move on. Stella said. Or step into the demon worlds linked through the rift gates. This world has 2 demon kings. Edna countered. From the purple moon it was surprisingly easy to find the demon king, because its presence was not obstructed by other things, and there was a straight line from the purple moon to the sun-facing side of the rings. And this world is a long way from being captured. Stella countered. Its only issue is that Hawa can't send anyone over anymore, and anyone Hawa sends need to send enough to deal with 2 demon kings. Lumuf looked at the rifts, and the paths through the stars. Let us hit the other worlds. We have a mission. This world can wait. The locals look very cozy and the demon kings seem content to wait. Why don't we just take a tour, pay a visit to the demon kings and just see what it was up to? Edna smirked, and it made all the other 3 domain holders stare at her. You're serious? Yes. Why is it not doing anything? Don't you want to get more data points? And it was strange. We stood near it and watched the demon king remain as if it was in a hibernating state, or at least, in a state where all it did was reproduce. The demon king did not move as if waiting for something to happen. Does this count as a stable state? Edna asked. We were wary that there are vulnerabilities, like what happened to Keith's demon king. If we attacked a living but ultimately harmless demon king, we could invite the presence of a far stronger demon king that would not just sit idly around. As weird as it sounded, when demon kings didn't act and remained passive, our immediate thought was to consider whether it would be less harmful overall to just suppress the rest of the demons, and leave the demon king as it is. A sort of fantasy version of harm mitigation. I think we should ask Hawa. This sounds like something Hawa would know. Edna said. Lumuf nodded. Well, another thing to add to our growing list of questions. Probably easier to just visit Satria again. Edna said, but she knew we could not do so. Our mere presence creates doubt, and shakes the faith of their followers. In a world where God is present and that God says it is the only God, the mere presence of someone outside that God's rule is heretical. I bet there's more to ask after this. Kapha said. Every single one of these peripheral worlds is about to be abandoned by Hawa. Might as well just move ahead and get on with it. We can compile our questions later. Is that artifact time limited or with limited use? Not really, it just takes a long time to charge between uses. The divine energies contained within it takes a while to accumulate. Lumuf said. Then let's keep going. Let's split up. Again. You are with me, this time. Lumuf pointed at Stella. Stella grinned. Sure, old man. This time, Edna would go with Kapha to the 9th, while Stella and Lumuf would go together to the 8th. 8th world. Triatuga. The 8th world started with Lumuf landing on what seemed like an alley. That was a good sign. Stella followed a brief moment after, since she did have to open the portals for everyone. An alley. A narrow street. A good sign, Lumuf said as his senses fanned out into the surroundings. There were people. Humans. Just the typical humans. They were both cloaked in illusions made to hide their presence, and so, they walked out of the alley to find a vibrant market. For once, this human city was not at war. Not yet, at least. This world's human society resembled the typical human magical medieval society. There are kings, knights in armor, guards in chainmail and mages in robes walking around the main street. This is one of those copy-pasted worlds. Stella said. Kinda lazy when they designed worlds like that. Lumuf chuckled. You make it sound like creating worlds and societies to be an easy thing. I would think the natural evolution of one of those the heroes caused the spread of humans across the world's theory. Lumuf looked around and felt calm. Relaxed. At least, for one, I like how familiar everything is. Familiar yet different. Stella laughed as the humans argued. As with all medieval societies, there exists a noble class, a priest class, a tradesman class, the soldier class and then the peasant class. A priest wearing typical Hawa outfits walked by, but he looked like the most corrupt, fat priest she had ever seen. Correction. Familiar. And extremely disgusting. From one priest to another, let us not judge too hastily. My avatar smiled, and walked about. The pair explored the human kingdoms, and found that this world was a tripartite state similar to three worlds. The humans, the forest folks, and the demon users. Humanity and corruption are almost inseparable. The humans were incredibly typical. It was a wide number of small and medium-sized human-dominant monarchies that were spread over 1/3 of the land. Unlike Threehome, they didn't have dominant bodies, and so, the alliance of the human nations were motivated by a need to stick together to counter the incursions of the others. There was no set of central authority, and overtaking it would be fairly easy. The forest folks were made of two great subspecies, the winged fairies, and the earthbound dryads. Unlike the myth of our own world, these fairies were all large, almost human-sized and possessed sharp claws and teeth. In some ways, these winged fairies were more like winged goblins than actual fairies, and the fairies were more like the lower class, and seemed to be bred in gigantic hives that looked like an oversized bee's nest. The dryads were the usual rulers, twice the size of humans and the largest were the size of full trees. They took the form of humans with bark skin, but could shapeshift into trees, or even animals. They also possessed a variety of earth magic. It reminded me of the dryad body I once possessed, and wondered whether that would be one way to infiltrate them. Or I could use my parasite, Ali, the former demon champion. From what we gathered, the forest folks were also made for a collection of kingdoms, each a gigantic forest of its own. With the existence of such a place, naturally I wondered whether their kingdoms were anchored by spiritual trees, but despite the large amount of magic coursing through their forests, Lumuf did not detect any spiritual trees. The forest folks used a kind of light camouflage and illusion ability, similar to my dark forest, in order to hide their presence from others, but around domain holders, it was fairly easy to unmask. The border areas between the forest folks and the humans were outright battlegrounds. The forest folks tolerated no humans, and killed them with their control over the trees. The humans of the border practiced extensive culling of trees, and permitted no shrub or bush higher than a child. Every single large plant along the border and a large buffer zone was effectively purged of all large plants. The humans were just as brutal, and the humans of the border used magical nets and harpoons with a kind of iron string. The priests of Hawa, despite their corruption, also possessed a set of purge and banish abilities that seemed extensively effective against the forest folks. The forest folks, on the other hand, were able to regenerate and recover from damage by draining their nearby trees of its life force. Their weakness was iron, and so, in a defensive battle, the forest folks could fight with extremely high toughness. The dryads, on top of their passives, also had good ranged abilities and had the ability to control their environment. I suspected that the dryads had a hostile relationship with spirit trees, and potentially, given the forest folks' ability to drain life force from spirit trees, it's likely that any spirit trees that spawned in their magical forests were sucked to death. The third faction, the demon users, were a kind of boar-faced people with strong hides, and it was walking into their lands that we realized what was wrong with them. They controlled demons, and I could feel their spiritual tendrils extend beyond their body. Young boarfolk could extend one or two spiritual tendrils out of their bodies, and they would link this to the demons. This would allow the boarfolk to control them. But this link was not a one-way link, and in older boarfolk that controlled more demons, the demons' influence also corrupted them, and turned them into almost demon-like creatures. This is like Eons' mana overwhelming, but far more specific. Lumuf observed them from our hidden location. The tendrils were visible to me because of our spiritual vision, but to normal mana-sensitive folk, they would feel as if there is a haze of magic emitted out of the boarfolk. The boarfolk created a society of sorts, small cities made of boarfolk and their enthralled demons. They were able to control weaker demons, but from what I could see, not a single demon champion. Instead, we followed the footsteps of the stronger boarfolk and observed that their base abilities were similar to animal tamers. They controlled the demons as their pets, and empowered their pets to do the fighting. Maybe they even were beast tamers at one point, but then turned their talents towards the demons. Unfortunately, this link would be supercharged whenever there is a demon king present. A link that would corrupt them. In short, when a demon king arrives into this world, the entirety of the boarfolk suffers from demonic corruption, and transforms into a demon. This process would strangely reverse itself once the demon king dies. Not all boarfolk transformed into the demons, like the children, and the boarfolk constructed special locations to house their young boarlings during the demon years, supported by a group of boarfolk that did not control any single demon. They essentially sold themselves to the demons. The demons spared the boarfolk, because of the demonic corruption through their mental link. I would love to capture them and study how their mental link worked. It should be possible for me to create more powerful versions of the boarfolk's demonic control, and turn the demons against itself. Though, looking at how the demons' mana worked, it's likely such a thing would be outright rejected by my domain holders, unless the circumstances truly demanded it. As of now, the world is still relatively stable. The rifts have not yet opened, but there was a glowing path in the skies above. The Demon King was coming soon, and war would break out. The boarfolk always invaded the rest of them, and so the other two races erected massive fortifications along the border. But we've seen enough. We would send Valthorns here to understand them in detail. It was time for the domain holders to keep moving. 9th Peripheral World. The Tale of the Two Continents. The portals opened, and Edna landed on the roof of what seemed to be a heavily populated city. Kappa followed. Crowds. They saw crowds, and everyone lived their lives. It almost seemed like none of them worried about the demons. Well, this doesn't look like a demon world. Kappa laughed after a week of traveling. It was just more and more people. It was just a world with a lot of humanoids. Humans, lizard folk, dwarves, elves, centaurs. It had most of the types of people, and yet they were all trapped on this massive continent-sized island. An island that clearly didn't have enough resources to meet everyone's desires, and so they fought each other over what little they had. The land was mediocre, the metals were mediocre, and the magic in the air was thin. It was a massive continental island, home to hundreds of millions, and not a single demon in sight. There were few forests in this world. Instead, everyone lived in cities, or in the case of the elves and dwarves, turned forests into cities. Farmland was also plenty, but unlike the other worlds, the farms here were heavily worked. They could feel the presence of many effects and abilities trying to force more output out of their limited farmlands. A large, heavily populated world with a scarcity issue. But only on this continent. Edna and Kappa knew the world was much bigger, and so they used magic, and traveled. Then they discovered a few more islands, with more resources, but infested with monsters. And even further away, another full-sized continent overrun with demons. It was as if imagining Treehome, in a situation where a demon king stuck to one continent and never left it. The humanoids claimed one continent for themselves, and the demons claimed another. The continent of demons was densely covered with demons of varying strength, and the demon king was a gigantic three-headed demonic elephant that was already digging into the ground. In a decade or two, it would completely dig into the core, and this world's way of life would change forever. The rest of the smaller islands were just overrun with magical creatures, and this was where the humanoids ventured for wealth and resources. But the great demon continent remained forever a land none dared touch. A land of death and destruction. They referred to it as the cursed continent. I couldn't help but feel a tinge affected. That was what they called the central continent, once. Well, Kappa and Edna landed on the island, and Kappa looked at his fellow warrior. This world's not in trouble. Not yet. Anyway. Seen enough. Edna smiled after about a month of travel. Kappa sighed. They've largely formed an assessment in that month. The great part of this world is its population. If our goal as an institution is to truly collect talent, then a significantly larger surviving population is more likely to produce the talent we need. Outside of the population, I suppose you are right. Let's go to the next. Each world had their own demon kings, and each had their own ticking timer. Some had more time, some had less. We would likely need to do a full sweep of all the worlds, clean it up for demon kings, and then decide where to properly set up
Base. There were 6 more worlds to go.